Because we know from Trump, he just had a rally yesterday, and he was kind of speaking, you know, allies have told me not to go after these attacks, but should I? And his supporters were saying, yes, do that. So she might want to then draw a comparison and say, he's gonna go after those attacks. I'm just gonna stay keeping forward, focused on policy. So that might be something that she decides to do to kind of, you know, maintain that stark contrast with Trump.
Well, and Trump suggested that it's hard for him to focus on policy when you have the likes of the Obamas, for example, attacking him after they spoke earlier this week. And certainly this convention does present an opportunity for Democrats of all kinds to lob whatever attacks they wish, bring the message to the stage, rev up the crowd and the people decked out in red, white, and blue, bring the party together. But this is also a money thing, right? Like, this is a huge ability to fundraise that the Democrats could have put together here in Chicago, knowing that they do have some fundraising advantages over Republicans right now. Certainly that is true of the Harris campaign relative to the Donald Trump campaign. How should we be thinking about the money aspect here, Laura?
So a fascinating stat, this is a new data that came out yesterday, and that Kamala Harris, in the first 11 days of her campaign, had as many donors as Joe Biden had during the entirety of his year-plus campaign. So people are coming in with money, and they're coming in very, very quickly. You know, we've seen that just in, the 4 weeks, 5 weeks she's been in the race, she's outraised Donald Trump. No party is going to be without money here. We should not be crying poor for either side. They're spending a lot. They have a lot to work with. But in those key swing states where it matters, in hiring canvassers, hiring advertisers, hiring advertising, this will be really important. In 2020, Trump ran out of money in the September-October timeframe. So if the campaigns don't spend wisely, if donors dry up, it can be a difference changer.
The numbers are incredible. Latest fundraising for the Harris campaign shows the camp pulling in $204 million in July, more than quadruple the total of Donald Trump's campaign. The convention itself is a fundraiser. They're going to add to that number this week, right?
That's definitely to be expected, and I think this points to a lot of the enthusiasm that we're seeing. We're seeing bumps in polling, but the question is, how long will this last? Is this kind of a honeymoon thing? And to your point about getting the money flowing, a lot of the speeches that we're seeing are the goal of them is to kind of get people to continue to go past Labor Day, get over this idea of a honeymoon. Senator, Clyburn had just said in an interview with Washington Post that I had, tuned into that, Michelle Obama in particular, her speech could really just be copy-pasted to other surrogates whose job is to kind of continue that messaging and get people to move forward. And again, we're bringing in more younger voters who are more energized. There are more states in play on the electoral map with her at the top of the ticket. So we'll see how they can keep that momentum going. On the Trump side, they said that this was something they expected, but that maybe that plateau has been reached. So the question is, has it been reached? Has it not? And we'll see as they continue to campaign.
All right, Bloomberg's Adriana Lowenkron and Laura Davison here with us in Chicago. Thank you so much. Now, as we consider the messaging we have gotten out of this convention and this conversation around freedom, whether it be reproductive rights or otherwise, there also has been another message surrounding American democracy. And this is actually something we heard about from House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi as she, on the stage last night, recalled the events of January 6, 2021.
January 6th was a perilous moment for our democracy. Never before had a president of the United States so brazenly assaulted the bedrock of our democracy, so gleefully embraced political violence, so willfully betrayed his oath of office. Let us not forget who assaulted democracy on January 6th. He did. But let us not forget who saved democracy that day. We did. And thank God we had a Democratic House of Representatives then. We returned to the Capitol that very same night. We insisted on certifying the election results on the floors of the House and the Senate. And we demonstrated to America and to the world that American democracy prevailed.
Joining us now here in Chicago is Senate Majority Whip and Chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin of Illinois. We are here in his home state for this Democratic National Convention. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to see you.
Good to be here.
And this is, as we've been remarking upon all week, a very different convention than maybe some expected just 4 weeks ago. Certainly we have a different candidate, but it also feels like we have a bit of a different message. Joe Biden was making his campaign very much about democracy, talking about January 6th, as we heard Nancy Pelosi do last night. Certainly Donald Trump hasn't shied away from that either. He's calling them patriots or prisoners in the case of some of those who have been convicted. It feels like that's not getting focused on as much now that Harris is at the top of the ticket. And I wonder what you think about that. Is that actually still the winning message for Democrats?
I think the message is freedom and so many different aspects of it. Certainly when it comes to reproductive choice, we found all across the United States, so-called safe red states are voting for women's rights, women's right to have the freedom to decide the future of their bodies and their families. I think that is an underlying theme you continue to hear. So freedom is the heart of the issue of this campaign.
Freedom is pretty broad. And I'd like to stay at a 30,000-foot level with you here, because you've been doing this longer than some of the people in this hall. We're told the economy is the #1 issue. We're told that people are very concerned about the border. But when you look at this broadly, this election, what is the choice beyond freedom when it comes to the actual issues that people will make their decisions on here?
Well, I think the choice boils down to a very simple phrase. Do we want to go back to the era of Donald Trump as president and all that that brought us? You know, we kind of laugh it off now when he suggested somehow or another bleach was going to be the answer to the COVID crisis, that it just disappear. And some of the other things that he did as president, we really just shrugged our shoulders and said that may not be normal for the rest of the world, but it's normal for Donald Trump. I think the American people, if they watch this convention, understand there's going to be a clear choice here of whether we're moving forward with a new outlook that's more positive towards relationships of Americans or returning to that Trump era.
Well, and part of the Trump era was marked by his ability to appoint a number of conservative justices to the Supreme Court, some of whom, of course, have come under fire or have been looked into by the Judiciary Committee within the last years. There's been concerns raised about ethics. How much of this election is also about the next president's ability to potentially change the shape of the court, knowing that one of the things Joe Biden wants to do before leaving office or has suggested seeing done is Supreme Court reform?
The Dobbs decision was a grim reminder to the American people that the selection of a Supreme Court justice can affect their lives personally. I mean, just look at the reaction across the United States of repealing Roe versus Wade. Donald Trump brags about that, but I can tell you most Americans don't brag with him. They think this is a serious problem, and it is a serious problem for women and their families all across the country. So it's a reminder, too, that that basic freedom needs to have someone to protect it, and Kamala Harris will do that.
When I think Dick Durbin, I think Chicago, and I'd like to hear from you on what this convention means for the image of this city, maybe the economy as well. You've got thousands, tens of thousands of people from around the country in town here, and Donald Trump is comparing Chicago to Afghanistan. He says it's more dangerous than Afghanistan, pointing to the 117 shootings on the 4th of July. What do you want people to take away? People are watching this from all over the country about Chicago that they might not know this week.
Well, crime and gun violence is an American problem. It isn't just a Chicago problem.
Yeah.
And they can try all they wish to blame this administration or the Democrats because of the political makeup in Illinois. But the bottom line I'm hearing from conventioneers is they've been dazzled by the city. Luckily, the weather couldn't be better for an August in Chicago. But in addition to that, the mayor has done a great job in cleaning up the city and a terrific job with law enforcement to make sure that we give people their First Amendment rights, but to stop them short of violence or vandalism. It really makes me sick to my stomach when I hear J.D. Vance going up to Wisconsin and talking about the terrible situation with crime in Chicago.
Yeah.
It was J.D. Vance personally that stopped the appointment of a permanent U.S. attorney to the city of Chicago. J.D. Vance personally. I confronted him on the floor of the Senate several times over that decision. He said he wanted to grind the Department of Justice to a halt. You tell me that's a law and order candidate? I think it's a weird candidate, to be honest with you, who suggests that closing down the Department of Justice is the right thing to do. And he did it.
Senator, you just alluded to some of the protests we have seen since being here in Chicago, though they have been, I think it's fair to say, smaller in scale than many expected or even feared coming into this week when it comes to the protests over the war ongoing in Gaza. Has it surprised you the degree to which they haven't been as disruptive or as robust? And do you think that may be attributable to the change in candidate? This isn't Biden's convention, it's Harris's.
I think that's it. I think you put your finger on it. Plus, there was a conscious effort by the mayor and other leaders to work with the demonstrators and say, we will protect your First Amendment rights, but we're not going to condone violence and vandalism. We just not accept it. We're not going to accept that. And so the police have done a good job here, I think. And when you consider past conventions, that is a very positive thing to say. But the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is we understand and they understand. If the alternative is Donald Trump in making these foreign policy decisions, they're willing to work with Kamala Harris to see if there's a reasonable way to resolve these.
Is that right? And Joe Biden has struggled to reach a ceasefire here. It was back in May when he rolled out that initial 6-point plan, and he says he's going to make this the priority for the rest of his term. If he cannot secure a ceasefire, is Kamala Harris going to have an easier time doing it?
Well, it's a big challenge for whoever has it, coming up with the agreement and then enforcing it.
Yeah.
But we all know, at least I feel, I was with the first senator to say so, that there should be a ceasefire and stop military operations and release the hostages. That, I think, was a starting point to eventually finding some solution in the Middle East. I've been disappointed with Mr. Netanyahu when it comes to a two-state solution. I believe in it. I think that's been our policy in the past and should be again.
Well, obviously, he wants to see that done. As I mentioned earlier, he also would like to see reforms to the Supreme Court, something that would take congressional cooperation. And I'm not sure, sir, how realistic you think that may be, which brings us to the point of whether or not you have more faith now than you would have maybe 4 weeks ago for your party to retain control of the Senate, for you to be able to retain your place as the majority whip.
There is no question there is a new spirit and energy in the Democratic Party for this election. It started when the decision was made by Joe Biden to step aside, a selfless decision that I respect him for very much. And that new attitude and approach is something that Donald Trump's been unable to match. He just can't do it, and he's frustrated by it. That's why he says these bizarre things about, we'll have one election, this will be the last one. What in the hell is he talking about? This is America. He doesn't get to dictate it. The Constitution makes it clear what the law is. And he's reaching out in every direction, flailing away because this is a new candidate he didn't anticipate.
I suspect that you've had a chance to talk with your old colleague from the Senate about his decision to drop out of the presidential race. Did you give Joe Biden any advice? Did he have words for you?
We did not. And I made a point after 30 years of friendship not to make a public statement, but to be in contact with him and talk to him. And I've done that since, after he made that decision. But what it boiled down to were 2 sentences in his speech to this convention. I love this job, but I love this country even more. And I think that really spelled out his resignation to the fact that he is now going to be moving on and has to live with his record, which I think has been one of the best in history.
Well, it's great for you to come and see us in Chicago. Thanks for showing us around town.
Glad to have you here. Come back sometime when there's no
Absolutely.
There's weather like this.
We might see a little more of the city that way as well. Senator, thank you. And we'll see you back in Washington. That's Dick Durbin, of course, of Illinois. Thank you for the time today on Balance of Power. We've got a lot more ahead from Chicago as we hold forth here at the Democratic National Convention. We're just getting started. Kaylee, this is a big day here. Kamala Harris in prime time tonight, of course, and some smart voices ahead here on Bloomberg, including Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature panel on the way next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg, live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
championship winning coach on our team. As a teacher, as a coach.
In Minnesota, we trust a coach.
Mr. Walls was also my geography teacher and my coach.
Speakers at night 3 of the Democratic National Convention talking about Coach and Minnesota Governor and Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz. Welcome back to Balance of Power, live from Chicago here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And while it was the coach we heard from last night, Joe, it is Kamala Harris we will hear from tonight on the last night of the convention. And the question is she going to introduce herself as prosecutor, vice president, or Kamala? Or
maybe someone else will introduce her to take care of that. But I suspect she's going to have to strike all of those themes here while also taking aim at Donald Trump. This is a tough job, of course, and we spent some time now with our political panel to talk about the strategy, what to expect tonight. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, is here, Republican strategist, of course, and Jeannie Shanzano, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, both, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributors. So you've got your candidate, a couple hours to go. How do you spend a day like this, refining the speech, getting this individual ready to talk to millions of Americans on TV tonight?
Yeah, they have their candidate. Let's put it that way. And look, I mean, you know, all the reporting is she is a detail person. Yeah. So I've heard she's literally still refining the speech this morning, closeted with her aides, working on approaches, how to actually, you know, create the inflections around the parts, and really drilling down, centrally focus on getting through tonight and punching through to the American public with an image that is sustainable for the next 75 days, because that's really, you know, what she has to do tonight is set that tone so that literally 2 months from now, people are still thinking about what they heard tonight. And that is introduce herself, contrast with Trump, set an agenda forward, and create a vision on how she sees the country.
Well, as we consider that vision, Jeannie, we've maybe gotten some flavors or tastes of it in the 4 weeks that she has been the presumptive nominee, now, of course, the official nominee. But how specific does she really need to get with that vision? Or are these broad strokes about ideas of freedom and the future going to be enough for the millions of Americans sitting in their living rooms at home wondering what a President Harris would do for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line. She certainly can't do a State of the Union, you know, a litany of policies that she hopes to achieve. I think my big question is, do we see her speak to the middle of America? You know, some of her ads, for instance, have been pretty tough on the issue of security and immigration. I would recommend, not that anybody has asked, but I would recommend that maybe she says, you know, the first 24 hours I'm in office, I will sign that border bill, the toughest border security bill. That kind of thing I could see being specific on. I think beyond that, we're going to see more of the broader strokes. I mean, what the Democrats have done so far is they have co-opted that notion of freedom, that traditional Republican focus on freedom, and they have been talking about that. We heard that last night with Coach Walz. I think we'll hear it again tonight with Kamala Harris. And on the economy, look for her to talk about economic opportunity. She wants to be a new kind of Democrat who says, we are going to offer you the opportunity to grow your family, to grow your, you know, your budgets, to live this American dream. And that is new language for the Democratic Party, certainly of late. So I think we'll hear that less than more specific policy ideas.
Yeah, interesting. If the object, though, is to tighten things up in terms of timing and the message, for that matter, tonight, Rick, where does ad-libbing come into play here? This is, I suspect, a very personal thing for any candidate. Bill Clinton came off the teleprompter for 12 minutes last night and landed some pretty good applause lines. How delicate is that balance? Or do you warn the candidate, just don't go there?
I know Kamala Harris, and she's no Bill Clinton. I wouldn't allow any ad-libbing. I mean, that is just a dangerous thing. And those lines, if they're that great, should be written into the speech and coordinated with rallies on the floor. In other words, you run an enormous risk of flopping with an ad-lib. And Bill Clinton can get away with it because he's Bill Clinton, one of the best communicators we've seen in 2 generations in American politics. Someday maybe we'll say that about Kamala Harris, but we're not saying that today. And why start with a mistake? She has to have a flawless performance tonight because this is her singularly biggest audience she's going to see between now and Election Day. Maybe the debate will have as many, if not more than this, but this is all her time. She doesn't have to share it with anybody, and she needs to knock it out of the park. People are expecting a lot. This is a convention that's had a lot of eye candy, right? People are like, wow, we're winning. And she's got to sit at the top of that pyramid. And so she's got to do better than Bill Clinton. She's got to do better than Oprah Winfrey. The bar is up there, and she has to meet the moment.
Okay, so Rick Davis not expecting off-the-cuff Kamala Harris tonight, maybe teleprompter Kamala Harris, but that's been one of the lines of criticism she's faced from Republicans, this idea that she's only sticking to the teleprompter. She's not answering questions. She's not ad-libbing. She's not doing anything on the fly. She's only doing very targeted, controlled environments right now. How soon after this convention, after she gives this speech tonight, does she need to sit down for an interview or hold a press conference like we've seen Donald Trump doing in recent weeks?
Yeah, I could agree with Rick more. Don't rock the boat tonight. Stay on the teleprompter. I don't even think, quite frankly, it worked that well for Bill Clinton, and he is a brilliant communicator. Tim Walz, what he did last night was 15 and a half minutes, and it was really, really good. So stick to the teleprompter, and I think she will. But soon after, they are going to have to do a tough media interview. I'm questioning, do we see her do it with her husband? Do we see her do it solo with her vice president nominee? But she is going to have to answer some tough questions. I would say take a couple days, regroup, and then get out there and answer that. I don't think she needs a press conference. I think she needs to talk to reporters. But by that time that happens, she's got to be very careful she doesn't make a mistake. And that's tough to do because, to Rick's point, her only time to correct that then would be with an audience as big as she might get at the debate, and that's even iffy. We're at like 75 days from today, which is insane.
Horrifying, actually, in some regard. But to consider that, do you sit Kamala Harris down with Oprah Winfrey? Does it need to be a journalist who's going to come in with gotcha questions? And do you wait till after the debate?
These are really tough questions that I've unfortunately been in the debates on. We had this with Sarah Palin. I mean, nobody really got to know her until her convention speech, and we wanted to make sure she was ready for prime time, and spent 10 days getting enormous amount of criticism from the media about not sharing her with them.
Right.
And difference here is Kamala Harris has been in the White House. She's done lots of interviews. She's competent, and so it's more like what you were saying. Who do you want to pick for that first sit down? But the sooner you do it, the better off you are, because you don't want that pressure to build up to the point where any little mistake in that interview is going to cause the press to collapse upon you. And of course, that's what happened to Sarah Palin.
So maybe do that before the debate so it's not an issue in the debate. That's all Donald Trump will talk about that night.
Honestly, I mean, knowing what we know, I'd have her do it the day after the convention. I'd have her do it on a Friday afternoon, lead into the weekend, so that the Sunday shows are all talking about that great interview, and just to get it off the table, right? Stop all this chit-chat about this. It's not productive.
Finally, as we talk about chit-chat, the chit-chat in Chicago has been whether or not we're going to see Beyonce show up, whether or not we're going to see any kind of celebrity introducing Kamala Harris tonight, if it's going to be a family member, if it's going to be one of the high-profile Democrats we haven't heard from yet, like, say, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Jeannie, how beneficial is this element of surprise? Do you think it's actually going to make more people want to tune in because they don't know who they're going to see?
They don't. It's working for me, Kaylee. For your sake, I hope it's Beyonce or Taylor Swift. I still am going with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but who knows? But for me, this question works. So, and I think Rick would say no to Katie Couric. That would be his no interview. So, for Kamala Harris. So, and you guys, he would say yes to.
Again, standing invitation.
Yeah, that's
on
known.
Bloomberg TV and radio for all of the candidates, vice presidential and presidential alike. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, thank you so much. And as we play this game as to who we're going to hear from tonight, it's because we've already heard from a lot of the powerhouses within the Democratic Party, including some others who were on the vice presidential shortlist, as we understood it. We heard last night from Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. We also heard from the former South Bend, Indiana mayor and transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg.
When the dog is barking and the air fryer is beeping and the mac and cheese is boiling over, and it feels like all the political negotiating experience in the world is not enough for me to get our 3-year-old son and our 3-year-old daughter to just wash their hands and sit at the table. This kind of life went from impossible to possible, from possible to real, from real to almost ordinary. in less than half a lifetime. But that didn't just happen. It was brought about through idealism and courage, through organizing and persuasion and storytelling, and yes, through politics, the right kind of politics. The kind of politics that can make an impossible dream into an everyday reality.
Joining us now here on set in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention is Tara Setmeyer, co-founder and CEO of the Seneca Project, and Crystal McCrary-McGuire, Seneca Project's National Finance Chief. The Seneca Project is a bipartisan super PAC led by women with the goal of mobilizing women voters in support of Kamala Harris. Welcome to you both. Great to have you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Tara, just to begin with you, because you're trying to elect Kamala Harris as someone who up until a few years ago was in the Republican Party. So how does it feel being here in Chicago, surrounded by some of the most faithful Democrats there are, and to be in this moment right now?
Yeah, it's frankly, it's very surreal. But you know what? This is what happens when you're on the right side of history and the right side of our democracy. And for women, this is our moment. We have really never seen a moment like this for women, the impact that this election will have on women and what's at stake for women. So when Michelle Kinney and I, my co-founder of the Seneca Project, decided to do this and embark on this, coming from a bipartisan perspective was important, because what's happening to women in this country impacts all of us. It doesn't matter whether you have a D or an R next to your name. If you are bleeding out in a lobby of an emergency room in a state that has now criminalized women's health care, that's what we're facing, on top of other extremist agendas trying to take women back. So the idea of us at Seneca, we have an ad called "We Won't Go Back" that we made even before Kamala Harris was in the race. So we felt like, well, we're on the right track here. But that's the vibe we were getting from women regardless of their political affiliation. So seeing this and being here and being in this environment is markedly different than the Republican Party. And the joyful warriors that are here, the camaraderie, the energy, the enthusiasm, it's inspiring. And we firmly believe that if you galvanize women, we'll save this democracy. And that's our goal at Seneca Project.
Well, we spent a lot of time talking the last couple of weeks about the rapid turn that this election has taken, this campaign. It was just a couple of months ago, people were talking about suburban women breaking for Donald Trump, that this whole thing was falling apart for Democrats. And because it's happened so fast, we haven't had so much of a conversation about the historic nature of this candidacy or this election, have we?
No, we haven't, and that's something that is so compelling to me and so many women. I look at my mother. We're Michiganders. She's 98 years old, and she was talking to me actually a few months ago about how we're angry. And I was like, who's angry? And she was like, me and my crew of girls that are like 75 to 103 years old. I said, why? And she said, because they're trying to take away our rights. They're trying to take away our rights to choose. And I was like, Mom, you're 98. You talk about reproductive justice or reproductive freedom? And she said, do you know how many women I knew pre-Roe who died during childbirth? And that hit me in the core. And what I love about the Seneca Project is that it's bipartisan. We are all Americans. We are women in this organization, and we are trying to fight and make sure that women ultimately have the right to reproductive justice. And that is one of the things that the Seneca Project is going to ensure across the country. We're getting the messaging out that this just doesn't affect Democratic women, independent women, or Republican women. The issues around IVF, the issues around contraceptives, that is something that affects all families. And that is one of the things that really appealed to me about the Seneca Project.
Well, and of course, you serve as the finance chief. And as you talk about getting the message out, most of the time that requires money. And we've had a conversation not just about the re-energizing of female voters and the attention they're paying to this race, but the way in which more people are donating. The Harris campaign says 60% of the $310 million they raised in July was from women. And I just wonder if you think that's sustainable, if that money is going to keep flowing.
Oh yeah, I not only think it's sustainable, but I think it's going to continue to grow as we see more and more what is actually at stake. When we continue to see the rights of women that are being attacked, that's something that I've continued to see it trend, and not just with registered voters, which we are seeing more women register to vote, but we're seeing it with young people.
Well, so we leave the convention tomorrow. And it's the sprint. We've got a debate in the beginning of September, and it's going to be amazing how fast this goes by. To think we have 75 days is somewhat scary to consider right now. So what's the strategy for Seneca to seize on that very short window? What's the roadshow going to look like? What do you have planned?
Yeah, so I think that this truncated timetable actually benefits us because the enthusiasm level is so high that post-Labor Day is really when everyone starts to pay attention.
Right.
And so now when ballots start getting sent out and women particularly are paying attention to all of the things that are under attack and under assault, that transcends party lines, they're going to go, okay, what do we need to do? So what our plan is, we're focusing on the battleground states because that's where this is going to be won. And you're only talking about 100,000 voters in about 4 states. That's it. This is going to be won in the margins. So as we're speaking to these moderate women, giving them the permission structure that it's okay for you to vote Republican this time. You don't have to agree on everything because about the privacy aspect of this, it's your ballot, your choice. Just like with your body, it's your body, your choice. It's your ballot, your choice, and no one else's.
Well, and on the ballot in some of these states, including battleground Arizona, is literally abortion.
Right.
And it's also on the ballot in a state like Florida, which we don't consider to be a battleground, but some Democrats, including Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who we spoke with here yesterday, has suggested Florida might actually be in play, and abortion could be a reason why. Will you spend resources there?
Well, it depends. I mean, obviously, Florida is almost a white whale for a lot of reasons, like Texas is too. But what's interesting is that Florida is even in the conversation. You have 8 states with abortion on the ballot, with women's rights on the ballot. Those ballot initiatives are getting there because of bipartisan signatures. This is not just coming from one party, particularly places like Arizona, which is critically important too. 577,000 signatures, it's a record. That means that these are women from all across the board and men who are looking at the situation. We also talk to the girl dads because we know that the relationship between dads and daughters is a very powerful one and a very persuadable one. So we'll also be targeting those girl dads, explaining to them what's at stake and do they really want their daughters in a future where they don't have the same rights as their grandmothers. So that is all part of our comprehensive strategy of targeting those women in battleground states and places where they have ballot initiatives is even better because the ground operations there keeps people
Everyone's
engaged.
welcome.
That's right.
Everyone's welcome.
That's right.
We come one, come all.
That's
this
right.
is for women. We want you to help the Seneca Project get some of our ads on the air in the battleground states and beyond because this affects all Americans.
You said something important, though. We're talking about 100,000 people. Think of what that is on a percentage. This is like a basis point of the entire American
Truly
population.
on the margins.
Yeah,
oh my gosh, so why waste time in anything other than the 7 battlegrounds?
It's like a Michigan home game, right? Right, Crystal?
Why would
Michigan
you hail to the big
We're going to the big house now. Okay.
Why would you look outside the swing states, though, when you're fighting over that small a number?
Well, that is what we're doing at the Seneca Project. We are within the swing states, to your point, and it will be decided there. And we are deeply committed to getting the messaging across around reproductive freedom for all women, all families.
Do you really feel like you're being competed with on this messaging or the counter messaging rather? Because when Joe and I were in Milwaukee last month, listening to those who were on the stage, a lot of them, white men specifically, the issue of reproductive rights kind of being ignored. We had a lot of conversations with this notion that the Republican Party seems to have abandoned the attempts to court suburban women.
Well, that's unfortunate. We'll take the suburban women, great.
But do you think you're having to fight them for that vote, or do you think that vote actually, you're the only one with that audience that they're targeting?
I think we're not taking anything for granted, right? Would you say that, Tara? I mean, we're not taking anything for granted.
I would agree with that. This is going to be a tough race. This is by far, we're going to win it. No. We're confident that there's a path to victory, but this is going to be incredibly close, which is why every vote matters here. And the fact that the Republicans chose a ticket that wasn't exactly friendly to women's needs or rights, and that they're taking that for granted and almost disrespectfully insulting women like this, they're almost doing our job for us as far as messaging is concerned, because women can see through this. They can see through the insults. They see through the childless cat lady comments. And, every week it's a different set of insults for women, different demographics of women. And that mobilizes women. And, they're looking at this and saying, We are not going to put up with this anymore, and you're not going to take our vote for granted. We make up the largest propensity of voters in this country, and we're the majority in this country.
We're coming out.
So it's at their, so if MAGA wants to continue to do that, it's at their own risk.
I wonder what you expect to hear on this specific issue tonight from Kamala Harris. It was noteworthy. Joe Biden does not like to say the word abortion out loud. He doesn't. Should she?
I think the vice president has been an incredible spokesperson and advocate for women's rights writ large, and specifically women's rights around abortion care, which is health care indeed. And I think that she has made that case extremely well to the American people. And I think that she will continue to make that because it is something that is so critically important. I mean, our lives are on the line, the lives of our daughters, the lives of our children. I mean, the fact that J.D. Vance does not believe that a person raped, a child raped, has the right to an abortion is disgraceful and tragic for women and families across this country.
And the messaging around freedom, I think, is the most important thing. And as a former Republican, that appeals to the constituency we're talking to because it's bigger than just abortion. We've seen that they're coming for contraception, for IVF, for no-fault divorce. It's the freedom. Do you trust women to make the best decisions for their families, for their bodies, for their daughters and their futures? And Republicans don't seem to do that. But I think what Kamala Harris is doing, messaging everything around the idea of freedom, is taking that back. Republicans do not own the concept of freedom and individualism. And so that's what I think has been a very smart pivot in the messaging that's appealing, particularly to those right-of-center women who are looking for that permission structure to vote for Kamala Harris.
Right. Republicans don't own what it means to be a patriot.
Correct.
And I think that that's something with the Seneca Project. We are patriots, and this is for all Americans, again, no matter what your political affiliation is.
Tara Setmayer, Crystal McCrary-McGuire of the Seneca Project. What a great conversation. Thank you so much for being with us today in Chicago here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. As we now turn to Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle in New York for a check on how the markets are behaving today. Hi, Abigail.
Hi, Joe. Well, the markets are actually not looking very good at this point. We're near session lows. The S&P 500, that very broad index, down about 0.8%. The tech-heavy NASDAQ down more than 1%, and the chip index down 2.3%. So we've gone from this sleepy wait-and-see week, waiting to see what Fed Chair Jay Powell will say in Jackson Hole tomorrow, to a bit of a sell-off, not quite to the degree that we had a few weeks ago, but nonetheless considerable declines. Now, given the fact that the SOX is underperforming, we can take a guess that it has to do with some chip stocks, NVIDIA in particular. In fact, NVIDIA, from a technical perspective, is breaking down to some degree. It is creating lower lows over the last couple of days, and the 10-year yield, the 2-year yield and the 10-year yield, for that matter, not helping out, going in the opposite direction of what investors might be expecting for a cut. But relative to NVIDIA, that might be the bigger event, actually, than Fed Chair Jay Powell tomorrow, because, of course, they will be reporting earnings next Wednesday. And while growth is expected to be big, it's not going to be as big as it had been the last quarter. Revenues are supposed to be double on a year-over-year basis, but the quarter before up 262%. On the bottom line, it's really supposed to be much less than the 600% growth. Some investors may not be aware of that, while others who are taking a look at that. And if we broaden out into, let's call it the Trump trade, the Harris trade, we have other technologies trading lower as well. You could say that's a positive for Donald Trump, maybe a negative for Kamala Harris. It's hard to say. One thing we do know, though, is Amazon delivery drivers have won an NLRB decision. That could be one reason that stock is down. Microsoft, on the other hand, it seems to be a part of that big tech trade. And then we have a bit of a broadening out relative to some of the other names that ExxonMobil is higher, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo. So some of those old school names, not tech-oriented names, Kelly, doing a little bit better. So it's interesting that we're seeing this. Not a lot of strength for the Harris trade today. Maybe some strength possibly for the Trump trade. Certainly not for DJT. This, of course, as the betting odds between these two narrow by about 4%. But of course, VP Harris still on top during DNC week.
Indeed, and it's her night at the DNC. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle in New York. Thank you so much. Here in Chicago, we are all just beating the drum to that headline address, the acceptance speech of Vice President Kamala Harris as she accepts the Democratic nomination for president. And the question on our minds is, to what extent will this be a speech about policy? And for our audience here on Bloomberg TV and radio, what are they going to get on economic policy in particular? For that now, Bharat Ramamurthy, Senior Advisor for Economic Strategy at the American Economic Liberties Project, also formerly with the National Economic Council in this White House. Thank you so much for joining us, obviously, here in your personal capacity. We got some outlines from Harris last week in North Carolina, broad strokes on price gouging, for example, what she would like to do with housing policy. Some of that has come under criticism as being inflationary. Donald Trump calls it communist. Does she need to double down on those tonight, tweak it, or not talk about it at all?
Yeah, I think that she should lay out the vision that she did last week, because I think it speaks to the actual concerns and needs of the American public. I really think that what the vice president has laid out is a opportunity and accountability agenda. And what by that I mean, no matter where you live in the United States, you should have an opportunity to build wealth, to get ahead, to pursue the life that you want to pursue. And by addressing the cost of housing, a child tax credit that would provide families with newborns a $6,000 credit for that first year of life, make sure that they get off to a good start. That's really about providing opportunity for Americans regardless of where they live. At the same time, as you mentioned, wanting to crack down on price gouging. This is somebody who was the Attorney General of California, a former prosecutor. I think she believes that there should be accountability for wrongdoing, no matter how big and how powerful you are. And I think that those two ideas, opportunity and accountability, are really going to speak to a broad swath of the American public.
How do you speak more specifically, though, about this price gouging idea? Because there are questions about how you even qualify that, never mind how you would go after a perpetrator. The National Grocers Association issued a statement saying the proposal calling for a ban on grocery price gouging is a solution in search of a problem. It does smack, as to some, campaign platitudes.
Well, look, I think that it's important to situate this in the context of price gouging laws all across the country. And I've heard people talk about this as price controls or communism. I think the people of the state of Florida and Texas and West Virginia, where they all have price gouging laws on the books, would be surprised to hear that they live apparently in a communist paradise. These are basic laws that you have to create guardrails in a capitalist society. The vice president clearly understands that we're in a market economy. Prices go up, prices go down. But the idea behind these laws is that when you have some kind of significant market disruption that leads to a surge in prices, there should be some basic protections. I think everyone would agree, I imagine, that if there's a hurricane that knocks out the water supply in a town, that the store shouldn't be able to sell you a bottle of water for $50 a bottle. And what we're talking about
Was that happening, though? You were inside the White House. Did you ever see evidence of grocery chains colluding to raise prices?
Well, I don't think that that's necessarily what it entails. So let me give you an example of something that we actually worked on in the White House. There's a meat processing industry, right, which stands in between the farmers and ranchers who raise the animals and the grocery stores. And this is a highly concentrated industry where a couple of large players control a large percentage of the market. You know, what you saw in 2021 and 2022 was that the margins in this industry, this highly concentrated industry, went absolutely through the roof. And that was the time when bacon was double the price that people were used to paying, and chicken thighs were double the price that people are used to paying. So there are these types of market issues, and it's not just the grocery store chains, it's people and companies all up and down the food supply chain. I think it's important. All we're saying is, all the vice president is saying is, there should be some federal authority working with Congress to make sure that consumers aren't being taken advantage of when there are big disruptions in the market, like we saw coming out of the pandemic.
And of course, it's inflation, trying to address inflation, that a lot of this comes from. We know that has been it is one part of the Federal Reserve's dual mandate, the other being, of course, full employment. And we got some employment revisions from the Bureau of Labor Statistics yesterday, downwardly revised by more than 800,000 jobs in the 12 months through March. If you listen to Donald Trump talk about it, he's calling scandal. This was him in North Carolina yesterday.
Before we begin, I want to address the massive scandal around the revised job numbers that were just announced this morning. The new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the administration padded the numbers with an extra, listen to this one, 818,000 jobs that don't exist.
Last hour, we spoke with Seth Harris, formerly of the Labor Department, who defended his colleagues at the BLS, his former colleagues, that is, saying this happens all the time. And we know here at Bloomberg that to be true. What it does suggest, though, is that this was a softer economy than this administration thought, than perhaps Kamala Harris herself thought. It obviously comes against the backdrop of Jackson Hole. How should we be thinking now about the trajectory of this economy moving forward in the next months leading up to this election day, and whether more softness may materialize that Harris could take blame for?
Well, first, I want to defend my former government colleagues and say that there's absolutely nothing nefarious going on here. This is the type of revision that happens all the time. In fact, the job numbers were revised down 500,000 in the Trump administration in 2019. So they should be beyond reproach. The other point is, yes, I think the job numbers are a little bit softer than we would have anticipated. Even if you deduct those jobs, we're still growing at a pretty steady clip for this point in the cycle. Remember, it's harder to add jobs when you're at sub 4% unemployment. That's just how these numbers work. That said, and I've said this on this show before, I think that the Fed made a mistake by not cutting in July. I think that they should be strongly considering the possibility of a 50 basis point cut in September, because if you look at the balance of risks right now, I think the risks on price stability and inflation are much less severe than the risks of the job market, where if you look at hiring rates, quits, unemployment claims, there's a whole bunch of data that suggests that there is some stress in the labor market right now.
If they don't cut by 50 basis points, what does the job market look like in November for the next president?
Well, look, the Fed rates are just one factor in all of this. I think that there are other stronger signs in the economy. We're still seeing good consumer spending numbers, retail sales, business investment is still pretty solid. So I don't think the job market is going to fall off a cliff. That said, it appears to me from all the data we're seeing that the Fed's rates are far too restrictive for the rate of inflation that we're seeing right now. And then moving that number down, by the way, whether it's by 25 or 50 basis points in September, is going to provide some important relief for both consumers and businesses going into the November elections. And I think it's going to be a big moment economically for those mortgage rates to start coming down, small business loan rates to start coming down. Consumers will feel that.
Obviously, Bharat, you are more free to talk about Federal Reserve policy with us now that you're outside the White House. My question is, if Harris and Walz win, do you want back in? Are we going to be talking about National Economic Director, Council Director, Bharat Ramamurthy?
I am happy to serve in any role. The number one goal from my perspective is for the Vice President and Governor Walz to win. I think it's extremely important for the future of this economy. A Donald Trump win and his economic agenda would reignite inflation and create all sorts of uncertainty for the business community. I really think that's an important point. We remember that the rule of law and strong capital markets, all of these are really critical to the success of the business community. And I think a Trump win, a second term, with some fewer guardrails than we saw last time, potentially, is going to be really dangerous for conducting business in this country.
How much will her agenda that we at least know of so far ride on a sweep on Capitol Hill, a Democratic majority in both chambers?
Well, clearly the composition of Congress is going to have a huge impact on the scope of
Not going to pass a price gouging bill with Republicans.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think that's actually an area of quite a bit of common ground. When we called out price gouging, in my mind, in the ocean shipping industry back in 2022, 6 months later, we had a bill on the president's desk which passed with sweeping bipartisan support. I think on tax policy, though, is where you see the biggest distinctions between the parties. A Democratic sweep could mean that taxes on the very, very rich will go up. And at the same time, we could see that expanded child tax credit. We could see those big investments in housing and so on. I think that's what it's at stake when it comes to the congressional majority.
It's great to see you in Chicago. Thanks for coming to talk to us. As always, Bharat Ramamurthy, Senior Advisor for Economic Strategy at the American Economic Liberties Project. Thank you so much. And some news for our Bloomberg radio audience in New England. Kaylee, we're excited about this. It's coming up soon, September 3rd. You can listen to Bloomberg Radio in and around Boston on our new signal, 92.9 FM, your new source for business news from the financial center of New England. Bloomberg Radio is moving to 92.9 FM. That's noon the day after Labor Day.
And of course, we're not at Labor Day yet. We still have a convention to finish, and we'll have more coverage here from Chicago on the late edition of Balance of Power. We'll be joined by Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, Michigan Representative Hillary Scholten, and DCCC Chair Congresswoman Susan DelBene. And of course, we'll be here throughout the night with live coverage of Vice President Kamala Harris's acceptance speech. So stick with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, and on Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Masser. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Thursday, August 22nd. I'm Carol Masser. Tim Stenivek is off. Matt Miller joining me in just a moment. Also coming up, the countdown is on. We are just mere hours from this point, leading up to that speech from Jackson Hole by Fed Chair Jay Powell. So we're going to head to Jackson Hole, head out west, get an update on what's going on the ground. Some interesting interviews coming from there as well. And then we're going to get into the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, underway in Chicago. Oprah and Tim Walz last night, Kamala Harris tonight, so we're going to get into that in just a moment. And then Peloton, certainly front and center. Shares are popping. We're going to get an update on what's going on at that company. Keep in mind the stock is way down from its highs back in January of 2021. All right, all of that to come. First, let's get a check on the trading day. Here is Charlie Keller.
All right, thank you very much, Carol Masser. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red, all lower. Lows of the day right now, down 1% on the S&P at 55.65. We have got the Dow down almost 300 points now, down 0.7%. The Dow down 296. NASDAQ down 276 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a drop right now of 1.5%. 10-year at 3.85%. The 2-year 4.00%. Spot gold down 1.2%, 24.82 for an ounce of the precious metal, while West Texas Intermediate crude is up 1.7%, 73.13 a barrel. Bond yields climb, stocks struggle, traders gearing up for Jay Powell's speech tomorrow, amid bets that he will be signaling willingness to cut rates, albeit at a moderate pace. Shares of Peloton Interactive very much in focus. Peloton up now by 36%. It reported revenue and profit that beat analyst estimates in the fourth quarter. Again, Peloton surging now by 36%. Among the names reporting today after the close of trading, we will be hearing from both Intuit and Workday. Recapping stocks lower, worst level of the day, S&P down now by 1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. There's a lot going on. I'm Carol Masser. Tim Stenivek is off today. Joining me is the one and only Matt Miller, who's all warmed up because, man, you did a couple hours on TV.
That's right.
You've done a podcast.
That's right. Just spent some time talking to Keith Naughton about Ford's new plans. But I'm looking forward to hearing about Mike McKee. I think talked to Patrick Harker earlier today.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, we're going to hear from Powell tomorrow. And then I'm pumped to talk to Joe Matthew out at Chicago.
I know. I stayed up way, way too late last night. All right. First, let's get to it. Let's head out west to Jackson Hole. That is where we find our Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy correspondent, Sans Hat, which is really, truly disappointing. But, okay, we'll take you anyway, Mike McKee. There's a lot going on. Mike's giving cues. Or is that the flies, Mike, I should say, around you? Tell us about what's going on the ground and some of the conversations you are having.
Well, it's really just getting started as people arrive here. I've had a chance to talk to a number of Fed officials who've gotten in over the last day and a half. Had a nice little chat with Jay Powell about his hike and things like that. Nobody's really talking policy at this moment. We did our interview with Jeff Schmidt yesterday, and we'll have plenty of Fed officials on tomorrow. But for the time being, everybody's just getting here and beginning to appreciate again how nice it is out here.
So you talked to Harker. I guess he wants to see more data, but is a 25 basis point hike at least penciled in?
Well, we didn't interview him for today, but I know others who did, and he's going to go along with it, is basically his line. He is somewhat skeptical, but is growing more convinced. And I think that's pretty much where most of them are at this point. They don't have to move right away because the economy is strong enough and inflation continues to come down. So they're perfectly willing to wait until September 18th and see what the latest data tell them and then make their decision.
But they seem to be getting pulled forward. We had last week, Bostic was saying he can wait till the end of the year. And then that was like the next day, he told the FT, actually, September's good after the CPI came out. Almost as if somebody else had been leaning on him, right?
I don't think so. I think basically he saw what
he saw enough that he wanted to see in terms of inflation that it would enable him to feel confident about September. And most of the people who had doubts seem to be trending in that direction. Jeff Schmidt, not yet, but maybe feeling a little bit better about it. And we haven't seen Mickey Bowman yet. She's the other hawk who has not been enthusiastic about a rate cut. We'll get her opinions sometime this weekend as well. And I think Jay Powell tomorrow will tell us that in everything but certainty, there's a very good chance of a September move.
Hey, Mike, you mentioned the president of the Kansas City Fed Bank, Jeffrey Schmidt. You did catch up with him at Jackson Hole. Let's just share with everyone a little bit of your conversation in terms of what he's looking for before, like, yeah, let's start cutting rates. Check it out, everybody.
This mandate on the inflation side is really important. I think we seem to be getting some really good movement that direction. But before we act, at least before I act or recommend acting, I think we need to see a little bit more.
All right, and that, of course, was Mike McKee earlier with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City President Jeff Schmidt. It does feel like, Mike, you know, that maybe the script is not exactly clear in terms of what the Fed will do at the next Fed meeting come September. It's just a few weeks away. I mean, is that fair? Is that what they're doing, or are we just being managed a little bit here?
Part of it is management. They don't want the markets to get too far ahead of anything, especially with this idea of a 50 basis point cut. If we don't see any kind of dramatic drop in job creation during the month of August, if inflation doesn't move down dramatically, there doesn't seem to be a reason to do 50, and they'd rather do 25 and see what happens when they do that, see what the reaction is. So they are trying to manage expectations. And since there is a chance of a wayward number between now and then, they don't want to guarantee anything, but they are beginning to feel much better about it. Yesterday we saw in the Fed minutes of the last meeting that a majority felt that they would be cutting rates in September. Just a question of making it certain, which they'll hold off as long as possible before doing.
Hey, Mike, a bunch of data today. We had jobless claims showing the labor market cooling only gradually rather than rapidly slowing. You had manufacturing activity here in the U.S. shrinking at the fastest pace this year. Further weakness in production, orders and factory employment. Existing home sales increased for the first time in 5 months. So there's a lot that investors are kind of wading their way through as they wait those comments from Fed Chair Jay Powell. Is there anything in these data points that you think the Bloomberg audience needs to take note of, or anything that could change a little bit of the Fed think here?
I don't think it changes the Fed thing, but the jobless claims numbers, especially when you look at non-seasonally adjusted, going down by almost 10,000, it does suggest that no, companies are not laying people off. And that was what we heard from Jeff Schmidt. He talked about in his district, a lot of companies are still seeing demand. And so they are not cutting back. They're not adding people, but they're not cutting back at this point. In terms of manufacturing, that's been an ongoing story, but we haven't seen it spread to other parts of the economy. So we'll have to see how that plays out. We've had a couple of months with manufacturing numbers that suggested that we would see manufacturing job losses, and we haven't. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what's happening with that, other than everything that's come out of the pandemics.
Okay, that doesn't feel good.
No, I think maybe the feed was lost, but
oh wait,
there he is. So hey, Mike, listen. Yesterday, we journalists were all super excited for the payroll revisions, and I guess a few banks also that got the data early from the BLS. Those showed that the economy likely added 818,000 fewer jobs in the year through March than we previously thought. So to me, that's a big deal. Do you think that moved anybody on the Fed?
No, and the reason why is kind of twofold. One is that if you break it down over that 12-month period, it was an average of about 68,000 jobs a month fewer, and that would take the average down for those months of 242,000 down to 174,000. That's still a very strong number, and the Fed would be dealing with the same kind of issues at that level as they are right now. The other thing to keep in mind is that revision doesn't include undocumented workers who could be on payrolls but are not being counted because the companies don't pay unemployment insurance on them. And finally, this number is going to be revised again. We'll get second quarter numbers in October, and we won't get the final revision until January. So it's very possible that some of those 818 would come back again. So there's a lot between now and the time that would be considered final. So the Fed really can't react to it that way.
Hey, Mike, just quickly, just about 30 seconds here. We're going to talk. Matt and I are going to check in with Joe Matthew from the DNC in Chicago. Anything on the ground? Are people talking about the elections and what it might mean for economic policy and how that might impact what the Fed has to do? And just quickly, if you could.
No, we have talked to people about that over the recent weeks, and their basic answer is until we know who's president, until we know what the policy is going to be, there's nothing we can really do about it, so we'll just stay out of it. And, of course, there are a lot of people saying we win because we're in Jackson Hole. We're not in a convention center in downtown Chicago.
All right, good stuff as always. Mike, always appreciate it. Next time you've got to wear the hat. I really don't like when he doesn't wear the hat.
I don't like it either, but I have a feeling someone in management tells him not to.
All right, well, 2 votes for the hat, I'm just going to say. Mike McKee, Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy Correspondent with the incredible backdrop of Jackson Hole. And Matt, we're going to stay there. Our coverage continues. Be sure also to catch a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance that's featuring Tom Keene and Lisa Abramowitz. That's live from Jackson Hole starting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Right now from Jackson Hole, Lisa, of course, Bloomberg Surveillance co-host, sitting down with the president of the Bank of Latvia. So let's head to Lisa. Lisa, all yours.
Thank you so much, Carol. I am here with Martins Kazaks. He is the president of the Central Bank of Latvia. He spent a full 24 hours about getting over here through a host of different transfers, and we are so glad that he is here to speak with us today. Thank you for being with us today. I want to start with why it is so important for you to be here in terms of the Federal Reserve policy and how it informs what you do at the ECB.
This is where the discussion happens in terms of the Fed's policy, but of course in terms of the global discussion as well. And of course we take our decisions with respect to what is necessary for the euro area, and our target is 2% symmetric. But of course what happens in the global economy and in the US financial markets does affect us as well.
You've talked about how it would be appropriate to have 1 or 2 more cuts potentially at the ECB for the remainder of this year. This comes at a time where there's a lot of speculation about a September rate cut. Do you have a sense of whether 2 or more could even be appropriate?
We'll see. We'll see. But what I would say, of course, we have had so far a relatively mixed bag of data, but it's still within the confines of the baseline scenario that we have. And given the data that we have at the moment, I would be very much open for the discussion of yet another rate cut in September. But we'll see. We still need to see the new forecast. We still need to see August data but for inflation. But overall, I would say, even if inflation over the next few months keeps moving sideways, it is consistent with further rate cuts.
How deep would they have to be? Do you have a sense of what that sort of neutral rate is?
We'll see that. We'll see that. Let's take step by step. Currently, we're still relatively restrictive, and with at least a couple of more rate cuts, we would still remain in the restrictive territory. So let's not jump ahead. Let's take it step by step. And I think from the current perspective, gradual and kind of step-by-step approach to rate cuts would be the best.
Do you feel like there is still a risk of reacceleration in inflation, or is that risk sort of off the table?
There are some risks over there as well, especially if one takes a look at the services inflation, where we've seen it being relatively stubborn in the range of 4%. But this is consistent with the baseline scenario that we have, and I would say that we're still solidly on the path to 2% during 2025. I would not like to see, however, this to be pushed into 26. Inflationary expectations being anchored and stable have been very much helpful, and I don't think that we should risk by not attaining 2% in a sustainable way quite soon, and then risking us being hit by some other shocks and then pushing inflation away from the target. I don't think that would be appropriate. So 2% gradually, step by step, during 25 would be a nice thing to do.
People in the media, like myself, sometimes will say that the Federal Reserve is central banker to the world. A lot of people at other central banks bristle at that and say, what are you talking about? We're our own central banks. This is not what represents us. At the same time, there is this question of how far the Fed can diverge from the ECB. If the Fed cuts by 100 basis points, like the market is currently pricing in, do you expect the ECB will have to respond with outsized cuts or more than 2 cuts?
Not at the moment. If you take a look at the current situation, then the ECB was the first to move. And even if the Fed moves by 100 points, as you mentioned, this year, and we as the markets expect currently move by 25% twice, so it will be 75%, so 75 basis points. Not a massive difference. We've seen much larger gaps in the past.
Do you think that the inflation problem is bigger right now in Europe than in the U.S.?
I would say that what makes me worried about European economy is the weakness of the economy itself. Growth has been relatively patchy. It has been timid. And monetary policy has done a good job to push inflation down, to create basis for growth, less uncertainty. But there is lack of structural improvements, which has meant that growth overall has been relatively timid. I would look at these differences, and that is, in the current situation, I would say, the major difference between the U.S. and European economies, which is the weakness of the economy.
So at this point, if you're more concerned about weakness, how do you understand rate cuts at this point? Is it, some people are talking about preemptive cuts, that in some ways it's trying to get ahead of weakness. Is this instead in response to true weakness that you're seeing?
Of course, we look at the whole set of data. We are not data point dependent, we are data dependent, which also includes the outlook for the economy and inflation. So there is always going to be a forward-looking perspective, and there's always the perspective of the policy implementation gaps and transmission gaps. So there is some element of preemptiveness always, okay? So I would not draw that a big difference here. We want to see inflation converging in a sustainable way to 2% during 2025, which means taking decisions with a forward outlook.
How much agreement is there right now on the European Central Bank Council?
I think it's quite all right.
You think that people agree that generally there needs to be more rate cuts throughout the rest of this year?
I think we very clearly see that monetary policy is restrictive, and we are very clearly on the path for the rates to go down. And then seeing what happens with the economy, what happens with the data, what is the new forecast that we will look at in September. There's discussion on the pace and the size of the cuts, but by and large, the whole storyline is relatively aligned and clear.
We were just listening to Michael McKeon. He was being interviewed by Carol Massar and Matt Miller, and they asked him about whether there was a political discussion here in any way, shape, or form. And I think about Adam Posen, who's going to be on our show tomorrow, who talks about how the Fed and how central banks in general get ahead of fiscal spending that increases deficits, which is likely going to happen regardless of who wins. How do you as a central banker operate with this idea that you need to increase spending? You see this in Latvia as well with defense spending. At the same time that you're trying to fight inflation that some people say was fueled by some of this spending?
I think this is the issue of the policy mix. Coming back to the issue of the geopolitical shifts and also kind of the issue of military spending, I would say that military spending, in case of Europe, by all means is no spending. It's an investment. It's investment in security and also improving the confidence of households, which we've seen has been relatively weak. And we still see that households are very cautious to spend. That element is still to play out. So I think the defense investment, both for industry, which is overall weak in Europe, and also for the confidence of households is very important. But coming back to the policy mix, I would say monetary policy should do what is necessary to ensure that inflation is quite stable and low. Okay, we have the 2% target. But one should be aware that we cannot, through monetary policy, gain the structural improvements. So structural policies that are extremely important to strengthen growth. And of course also fiscal. And in the European case, it's going to be a very testing time in terms of fiscal story because we need the investments. But at the same time, of course, we have a new fiscal framework. And credibility of the fiscal framework is very important. So it cannot be disregarded either. So it's a tough world. We have to walk the path with our very clear target. But at the same time, there are lots of disturbances from loads of other players.
So basically, it's complicated. President Kazaks, thank you so much for being with us. President Kazaks, the head of the Central Bank of Latvia. Back to you, Carol and Matt.
All right, great stuff. As always, our Lisa Abramowitz, one of the hosts of Bloomberg Surveillance on radio and TV. Be sure to catch a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. It'll be featuring Lisa along with our own Tom Keene. That'll be live from Jackson Hole tomorrow starting at 9 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV. What?
That's great.
I know.
You know why?
I love those two. What?
I'm taking the day off.
So you're going to be home listening and watching?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to tune in for that. I've got the Bloomberg TV app on my Apple TV.
You know what else?
What?
I'm also off tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
I know.
Maybe we planned that.
Who's going to, hold down the show?
What are we doing tonight?
I don't know. I don't know. I know what I'm doing. All right. Coming up, folks, we're going to get into economics and politics that came together at the DNC last night. We're going to get the update and really the real star of some of the speeches and the conversation. So we'll get to that in just a moment. First up, though, back to the trade, back to your top business stories, and back to Charlie Bell.
All right. I thank you very much. And back to a lower market right now with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. We are all in the red right now. S&P down 42, 55.78. Where we stand, a drop right now of 0.75%. Dow Industrials down 195 points for the Dow, a decline of 0.5%. NASDAQ, the composite index, down 235, down 1.3%. NASDAQ 100 index also down 1.3%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares trading lower as well, down 0.7%. We've got the 10-year yielding 3.86%. The 2-year right now 4.00%. Gold down 1.1%, 24.84 a barrel, an ounce back below 2,500. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.8%, 73.22 a barrel. Briefly, Carlyle Group acquiring Advance Auto Parts Worldpac unit for $1.5 billion, striking the first major industrial investment for the firm in more than 2 years. Advance down 15.9%, Carlyle down by 0.5%. Recapping, S&P down 41, decline of 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, we are now up to date. Charlie Pellet, thanks so much. Carol Massar, along with Matt Miller. Matt in for Tim Stanovic, who is off today. All right, well, Vice President nominee Tim Walz wrapping himself in football and freedom as Democrats use the third night of their convention to offer really an open hand to the swing voters outside the country's coast. Walz introduced himself to the nation as a teacher, a coach, a veteran with bipartisan credentials, and a simple pledge to respect our neighbors and the choices that they make.
My life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your determination. And most of all, thank you for bringing the joy to this fight.
All right, that is, of course, Vice President, Democratic candidate Tim Walz. His speech, not the longest.
No.
Not the
I mean, I don't
longest.
stay up that late, but
I did. I actually fell asleep and then had to rewind the DVR and then go to bed till after 1 o'clock. Anyway, he was the last, of course, among speeches by rising stars. The Democratic Party, one by Oprah, some performances by well-known stars. With more from the DNC is one of the co-hosts of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio, Joe Matthew, live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. So, Joe, I feel like, where do we begin? Where do you, what is top of mind when you think about last night against the last two nights?
Gosh, well, that's a big question. Look, it was a big night of a little old and a little new. I mean, we had the former President Bill Clinton open up what was billed as the Rising Stars Night, and it was kind of a walk-up to some of those names. Oprah Winfrey was the big surprise. Nancy Pelosi spoke. Well, I wouldn't say that, but sure, I guess you can go there. Pete Buttigieg spoke. He's not old. And then Tim Walz. Not so much about age as maybe arrival in the party apparatus here. Either way, look, the fact is they've been having trouble with the run of show.
He mentioned that he was. He said he was old himself, but he said at least he's younger than Trump, right?
He sure did.
That's the part that I saw.
Well, what's interesting, too, is, and I think it was a great tip-off, right, to, Bill Clinton reminding everybody how many years ago. I think he said he's been to, every convention over a long period of time, but reminding folks that at one point he was the, young Democratic rising star, and we saw a lot of those rising stars last night.
Yeah, remember, he was the comeback kid in New Hampshire. So this whole passing of the baton has been a big theme this week. It wasn't just Monday night when Joe Biden spoke and left the building. It's been kind of every night we saw. Then the Obamas had their turn. Then it was Clinton, Pelosi last night. And tonight it's going to be all about Kamala Harris. There are questions about who's going to introduce her. We have not seen a final schedule for tonight. They're keeping that pretty close to the vest. This is a convention that's really been leveraging, as you've seen, celebrity, culture, entertainment, and I suspect there's going to be more of that tonight. Matt, you talk to Kaylee Lyons, she'll tell you Beyonce shows up, but we have no evidence of that yet.
What do you do if you're waging bets, Matt? Do you think it's Beyonce?
I mean, I would guess. You know, Ezra Klein argues in the Times that the baton was really passed from the Obamas directly to Harris, almost bypassing Biden, who was more of a caretaker. I wonder what Harris is going to do that's different than President Biden. I guess that's what everyone wonders, right?
Everyone does wonder that, and I'm not sure that you're going to hear the answer to that tonight. I mean, this is a political convention. This is not a policy paper. You know, this isn't necessarily a C-SPAN interview here. She's there to get people on their feet, and get the fun and the energy going, but also has to strike the balance and talk to people at home. Part of that, as I was saying, comes to getting on the air before 11 o'clock at night on the East Coast. This is a convention that has failed all 3 nights in a row to do that. They've been canceling speeches. They've been pulling videos. They're trying to move things around. My God, if you saw them last night, by the time Pete Buttigieg got off, Wes Moore was still leaving the stage when the Secretary of Transportation was coming on. So they need to get their arms around the timing on this, because it will be the biggest audience of Kamala Harris's political career, the biggest audience that sees her, maybe outside of the debate in September between now and November.
Yeah, I do think about that. They need a good Bloomberg producer, because I don't know. I've had many producers saying, stop talking because we're running out of time, and they're pretty tough on things.
Exactly.
Having said that, I have to say one thing that was very stark for me and made me remember the very end of the Trump presidency after that election, the January 6th insurrection, and that video that played that reminded us of really everyone wondering whether our democracy was going to last. And it's just a reminder of potentially maybe what another Trump White House could mean.
Well, they got you.
They did.
Well, that's exactly what they certainly want me to take away.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And listen, you've got a former president who says he's going to pardon some of those convicted on January 6th. So this is an inflection point. A lot of the lawmakers of both halls were in the House the day that happened. So this is also, part of the job is reminding people of what the Trump term felt like. She'll do that tonight. I wonder how many times she mentions his name. Donald Trump's name is mentioned 150 times in the party platform that was adopted earlier this week. So I suspect that we're going to hear probably just as much about Donald Trump here this evening. But like I said, it's a delicate balance. She's trying to introduce herself to people who don't know anything about Kamala Harris, just like Tim Walz was last night, but also has to levy the attacks on Donald Trump while she's at it.
She tells us, and everyone there tells us about their spending plans. They're going to buy you a new car and you a new car, but not about how they're going to pay for it, right? I have read reports that she's on the same page with Biden in terms of raising the corporate tax to 28%, raising capital gains to 44%, even taxing possibly unrealized gains. Is that something that she's going to push for?
I highly doubt that you'll hear about that tonight, at least. When it comes to unrealized gains, that's been something that a lot of progressive Democrats have been looking at for years and have never been able to get it past the finish line. Ideas like that, Matt, would require a sweep on Capitol Hill. You're not going to get that done without the House and the Senate, just like the price gouging bill and a lot of the things that we're talking about here. But Kamala Harris doesn't want to be framed as a dangerous liberal from San Francisco. So some of these issues we've seen her move on a little bit. You're right about the 28%. You're also right about the fact that this campaign, as well as the Trump campaign, has not made an effort to talk about how they pay for anything. Donald Trump's the same. We're talking about extending the 2017 tax cuts to the tune of trillions of dollars in our deficit. There's no sense of how to pay for it other than we're going to grow out of it. And no serious economist we've talked with on Bloomberg seems to think that's a workable plan. So they both have to answer those questions at some point between now and November.
So when do we get it? Is it in the debates, Joe? When do you anticipate that we actually get some specificity that voters can pull a lever on and figure out which candidate they want to vote for?
Yeah. Well, to the extent that voters want specificity, by the way, there are a lot of people who are taken up by the Vibes campaign, and that will probably lead a lot of people to make their decisions. But we've got a debate on September 10th. That's going to be an important inflection point to maybe wrap things around. Rick Davis, our Republican strategist, was talking earlier. Remember, he had to introduce Sarah Palin to the world. They'd never heard of her, and there was a massive demand for her to start doing interviews, and we all remember how that went with Katie Couric. He suggests you rip the Band-Aid off this thing. The minute they leave Chicago, sit down for a serious interview, and then spend your time preparing for the debate on September 10th. I have to admit, though, a debate with Donald Trump is typically not one that features a heck of a lot of details. You know, that could be a lot of mudslinging, that could be a lot of rhetoric that doesn't necessarily clue us in to what their, for instance, economic plans are going to be.
Joe, is she afraid to do an interview? What are you hearing from inside the Harris camp?
Is she, I'm sorry, does she want to do one?
Yeah, is she afraid to do one? I mean, what is it? Is it just a case? I mean, listen, to be fair, this campaign has been condensed, you know, many times over, right? This isn't the way it was supposed to go. But having said that, what is holding her off, or, you know, when does she kind of cross that line and actually sit down with a couple of the networks?
Well, I think you have to consider who's asking for this, right? Republicans say that she should do an interview. We in the media say she should do an interview. If you're running that campaign, you have seen an absolutely incredible turn in the race, historic in terms of the time with which this has turned around. She's closed the gap, and even in some polls is now leading Donald Trump. The strategy to suddenly go out and start talking about heady details on policy is probably, frankly, not the smartest political move. She's riding a wave right now. Why would you disturb that with a hard-hitting interview that was full of gotcha questions? I wouldn't be surprised if she sat down with an interview with the likes of Oprah Winfrey, who we saw last night at the campaign. Maybe they sit down together. Maybe it's Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. The venue is something that they can work on here. I don't know that she's afraid to do interviews. She's the vice president. She's done a lot of them, and we know how she feels about a lot of these issues now. I think this is more about optics, timing, and how they can actually, how long they can keep this honeymoon going before it gets down to brass tacks.
We already know about the coconut tree and the Venn diagrams, and
she's been okay with that stuff.
I love that stuff.
Listen,
I don't know, Matt. If you can explain the coconut tree stuff, I'm very confused about all of that.
That's about, you know, what came before us.
Well,
but we're unburdened at the same time. So, you know, I wonder about the Israel issue to get much more serious. We had Steve Eisman of Big Short fame on the show a couple of months ago, and he gave Trump 100% odds to win the election. To be fair to him, at the time, you know, Trump was running against Biden, but it wasn't Biden's cognitive decline that he thought would be the weakness. He thought, Steve Eisman thought, that the campus protests that we were seeing, the anti-Israel, kind of anti-Semitic protests, I mean, in some cases, not in every case, obviously, would really disrupt this convention in Chicago. And Joe, so far, it doesn't seem like it's been disruptive at all.
You're right. This is one of the stories, one of the storylines that did not materialize. Matt, we were told tens of thousands, a la 1968, we're going to shut this city down, that they would clash with police. Worst case scenario, we saw about 1,000 together at one point here. There are questions about whether all the protesters showed up and whether the change at the top of the ticket changed the mood, or maybe this was bluster, maybe this whole thing was overplayed. Fact of the matter is, we're talking about a potential ceasefire again now. I don't know if that has inspired feelings around this story, but even progressive Democrats seem to be coalescing around Kamala Harris, even though she has the same exact policy about Israel as Joe Biden did. Her words are frequently interpreted differently. She does, for some reason, seem to be thought to be more sympathetic with civilians in Gaza. But print it out. Look at the words she uses. She's basically saying the same thing, articulating the same policy that Joe Biden has had. And if he cannot reach a ceasefire in Israel between now and the election, when he leaves office, there are a lot of questions about whether she would have an easier time doing that or not.
All right, kiddo, anything 20, 30 seconds here that could surprise you that you're watching out for? Is it going to be kind of to be expected in terms of leading up to Kamala Harris and giving her acceptance speech?
Well, I'll tell you what, I hope you keep calling me that, because I'm going to just confess to you right now, Carol, I turned 50 years old at this convention yesterday, and I love the kiddo. But what I would be watching is who introduces Kamala Harris. Everybody says it's going to be some razzle-dazzle. I don't know if it's going to involve the beehive or not, but keep your eyes on the stage around that time.
George W. Bush.
No, it's probably not going to be George W.
It would be
Bush.
great if it were George W. Bush.
Actually, how about Mike Pence?
Yeah,
how about Mike Pence, Matt? That would set him up, wouldn't it?
I think he's a little too. I don't think he has the strength.
Could you
to do
imagine?
That. No way.
That would be kind of wild.
No, that's not. No, I can't imagine, and it's not going to happen, but I just had to do that.
All right, good stuff. We'll all be watching, of course. Bloomberg co-host Balance of Power. Catch them at 5 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and TV, and of course into the evening. They have long evenings as of late. Let's get a check on world and national news. A lot going on. Here's Amy Morris.
All right, thank you, Carol. The Democratic National Convention culminates tonight with Kamala Harris's acceptance speech as the party's presidential nominee. Evan Roth-Smith is lead pollster with the Democratic polling firm Blueprint.
Kamala Harris has a lot of work to do to define herself on the economy, a lot of work to do to convince voters that she meets what they want to see out of Democratic policy on inflation and prices, at the border, and she's begun to do that.
Democratic pollster Evan Roth-Smith, the head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, says he is concerned by Ukraine's incursion into Russia because the fighting is near the Kursk nuclear power plant. Rafael Mariano Grossi is head of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
These are hot nuclear reactors, which means that in case something, God forbid, happened, there would be a very serious situation.
Rafael Mariano Grossi tells Bloomberg the plant uses the same technology from the Chernobyl reactors that melted down in 1986. Italian search and rescue teams have retrieved a fifth body from a sunken yacht off Sicily. The family of Jonathan Bloomer says the Morgan Stanley International Chair has died. Multiple reports indicate one of the bodies recovered was that of British tech tycoon Mike Lynch. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. Here at Bloomberg, we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ very much in the red today, ahead of Jackson Hole tomorrow. S&P right now close to session lows, slight bounce off the bottom. It's still down 43, a drop of 0.8%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 200 now, down 0.5%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is lower by 235, a drop of 1.3%. 10-year at 3.86%, with a 2-year 4.01%. Spot gold down 1.2%, 24.81 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil now higher by 1.4%, 72.93 a barrel. Zoom video communication shares are surging after earnings, up now by 12.6%. It gave a sales forecast for the current quarter that beat analyst estimates. Heading in the other direction, Snowflake, the stock is now down by 13.6%. It gave a sales outlook that failed to reassure investors that the company will gain ground in the market for artificial intelligence software tools. Again, Snowflake down 13.6%. Recapping, S&P down 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, everybody, check it out. Shares of Peloton, man. Investors pedaling fast to snap them up. The stock soaring the most ever, although shares, I should point out, still down about 30% year to date. They're off about 97% from their all-time high. That was back in January of 2021. Let me just pull it up on the Bloomberg, because the stock is right now up 36%. Let's get to it, though, because there's stuff going on. Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent Mark Gurman is with us in the LA Bureau. Mark, we're usually talking Apple, and we might get there. Peloton, the latest results, earnings beat. It seems significant. This is a company that has continued to struggle since the pandemic. What's your take on kind of what we got, and does it mean that a corner has turned for Peloton?
Investors clearly are happy about the showcase of some better profitability, right? More free cash flow, more savings. But let's not forget, last quarter, their CEO resigned because clearly he didn't like the road he was seeing ahead of him. You had another 15% of jobs cut. That followed 3 or 4 rounds of layoffs in the prior 2 years. They've completely destroyed this business. Right? They've taken it from this hardware darling that made these popular bikes and treadmills and have re-architected it into an app business. I know investors are seeing the potential of profit here, and they saw that beat in this fourth quarter. But if you look ahead to the first quarter, you're going to see a dramatic revenue tanking on paid app subscriptions as well as their hardware purchases. So I'm not entirely sure why investors are so optimistic about this company. I personally think that a long-term future for Peloton is far-fetched. I think that the best approach for them would be to try to sell themselves to a Netflix or an Amazon and convince Netflix or Amazon for a few $1 billion to buy their very strong arsenal of content, right, and their application and that brand, and make that part of a Netflix subscription, an Amazon Prime subscription, to make that more valuable and get more people to sign up for their monthly services.
I mean, the whole company is worth less than what Apple paid for Beats, headphones that you don't even see anymore because Apple decided they don't even care about the brand. It's got to be the smallest company that I've ever heard you, Mark Gurman, talk about. They only grew revenue 1%, and as you said, it's expected to fall. The only reason they're getting fatter margins is because they're cutting costs. At the same time, it kind of reminds me of Apple in the sense that the market is just saturated for these very expensive devices, and they need to find other ways to get revenue. Do they have any other leads?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Peloton, as one last-ditch effort, winds down their hardware business completely, right? Tries to take a loss on that on their balance sheet and completely gets rid of it. There's nothing proprietary about their hardware, if I'm being completely honest, right? This is something that any company in America or China or wherever can probably replicate really quickly. It burns a hole in their pockets and their margins. They've destroyed this business. Barry McCarthy drove this business into the ground. He really had no choice after what John Foley did to it, thinking that this was going to become a $1 trillion company coming out of COVID and that people would never leave the house again. So I certainly think that the saving grace here is their content and their application. And I wouldn't be surprised in 2 to 3 years from now, if Peloton hasn't sold itself, that it's an app-only business. And you could have a nice business as an application. We've seen so many companies be app-driven businesses. You have Uber, Netflix obviously is an app in many respects built around content. So the potential is there. But to your point, the only reason they're showing better profitability and cost savings is because they keep firing people and cutting costs. Now, back to my hardware point for a second. When their chief product officer, this was one of their few co-founders left about a year and change ago, he was not replaced by a hardware person. He was replaced with someone who's an expert in software, in content, in server infrastructure. And I think that gives you some sort of indicator where this company is going, all in on that app. If they can turn that strong brand into a strong application, they have a future. But that's not a multi-billion-dollar public company.
Mark, where did they go wrong? Where was because they came out of the gate a hardware company, right? And there was a lot of fanfare, there was a lot of ads. I know we, as a media organization, did multiple stories and conversations. I know you were covering them. Where did they go wrong? Is it that they just thought too big, the spend? What was it?
Or was it just coming out of COVID? I mean, everybody was riding this bike in COVID.
But what I'm trying to understand is, if COVID, I've got one. I canceled my membership just recently because I'm just,
It's a coat rack.
But I had it But I had it before COVID. Having said that, though, if COVID hadn't happened, would they have still had problems and issues potentially?
They were this nice high-end brand, small company prior to COVID. COVID hit, they exploded. Everyone wanted one, right? They were growing so quickly. They continued to hire. They made major investments. They rolled out new products. They doubled down on their content. But the worst thing they did was try to open this facility in Ohio to manufacture their own equipment in the United States. And they spent billions of dollars to do this, right? They're only now writing that all down. And they really, put themselves in a bad position. Fundamentally, they made a terrible bet that COVID would last for the foreseeable future, maybe forever. People, and I hate to be exaggerating here, but this is really what they thought. People weren't going to leave the house again. People weren't going to go to gyms again. They were going to only work out from home. And they didn't double down. They quadrupled down on that idea, spent too much money. Gyms started reopening. The world returned to some semblance of normalcy. And they were stuck with all this excess inventory that nobody was buying because people didn't need it. On top of that, they had crisis after crisis, including launching a treadmill that didn't have proper safety protections, that ended up killing a baby, hurting pets and hurting people. And then their bike had issues too, where people were falling off of the bike. So their hardware wasn't safe and their hardware wasn't very good. So it was just this multitude of issue after issue after issue on top of really bad bets that drove this company to a place where a new CEO had to come in, fire half the company, wind down much of the hardware business, and now they're left with an application that then ran into marketing issues, that then ran into cost issues. So they're not really in a great place right now, despite the new profitability they're showing.
Kind of sounds like next stop, the CEO has to be an expert in how to sell a company, right?
To be fair,
maybe
at the time, many of us thought nobody would leave the home again, right? And a lot of workers are still working from home.
You didn't think you'd go back to work?
No, I never spent a day at home.
Yeah.
I was in the office every day. But there were people who thought, this was a structural change. Not that we wouldn't literally leave the home, but that we would work from home, we would exercise from home, we would only watch movies at home, and a lot of that has happened.
Yeah, there's a balance.
Yes, but Matt, and you've seen so many other companies face this, right? You've seen other companies like the tech giants over-investing and having to pull back. But what Peloton should have done, right, was scale as needed. They refused to scale as needed. They went from 0 to 100 to prepare for demand that they were anticipating that never came. The smarter thing would have been to follow the Dell and Apple model of supply chain and build to a necessary degree. Now, under this new leadership, they've done a lot of smart things to unwind the troubles of the prior management team.
Okay.
And they could have a pretty good app, but, and one last thing I will say on this, because it's
just
important.
quick,
there's no stronger brand in fitness than Peloton. So there is something still interesting there.
Right? It's a value. You say Peloton, people know. All right, interesting. And we figure there'll at least one more chapter to this. And he'll be covering it. Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent Mark Gurman out there on the West Coast. Coming up, we're going to talk Crocs. It's Matt's favorite shoe. This is Bloomberg.
Company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Among the names scheduled to report after the close of trading today, we will be hearing from both Intuit and Workday. Intuit shares ahead of earnings down 0.6%. Workday right now down by 0.4%. We were just talking with our Mark Gurman about Peloton Interactive. The stock Peloton reported revenue and profit that beat analyst estimates in the fourth quarter, signaling that the struggling fitness company's turnaround efforts are starting to bear fruit. New York-based Peloton managed to eke out revenue growth in the 3 months ending June 30th with sales of $644 million. That was up less than 1% from a year earlier, but easily beat the average Wall Street estimate of $630.1 million. Again, Peloton surging today by 36.9%. Williams-Sonoma, the retailer, reported net revenue for the second quarter that missed the average analyst estimate. We do have shares of Williams-Sonoma down now by 7.9%. Jack Daniel's whiskey maker Brown-Forman has become the latest company to scrap corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs as pressure increasingly grows from conservatives. The company sent a letter to employees informing them that Brown-Forman was going to stop linking executive compensation to progress on DEI. The company also said it will end its participation in an annual ranking of companies with LGBTQ friendly work environment. Shares of Brown-Forman today, they are trading lower by 0.6%. It is a down day for the U.S. stock market. Coming up, we will recap what's happening on Wall Street, and those are some of our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, more Business Week to come, including what's going on with Crocs. We'll get to that in just a moment. In the meantime, let's get back with a check on world and national news. We head back to D.C. and Amy Morris. Amy?
All right, thank you, Carol. The Democratic National Convention culminating tonight with Kamala Harris's acceptance speech as the party's presidential nominee. Evan Roth-Smith is lead pollster with the Democratic polling firm Blueprint and says the vice president has begun to define her economic agenda.
You saw prices highlighted in a big way and economic concerns, this bread and butter concern for families, working families, highlights from her career as California Attorney General, played again and again in videos and during speeches at the convention that she took on big companies. And we're going to see that more and more as she defines herself as this champion of working people.
Democratic pollster Evan Roth-Smith spoke with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern from the convention in Chicago. British tech tycoon Mike Lynch has died. He was 59 years old. His death in the sinking of a yacht during a severe storm off the coast of Italy was confirmed by people with direct knowledge of the matter. They asked not to be identified. One of his two daughters, Hannah, remains among those unaccounted for. The luxury yacht outing was a celebration with a small group of advisors of Lynch's recent acquittal on fraud charges. Venezuela's Supreme Court has backed President Nicolas Maduro's claims that he won last month's election and said voting tallies published online showing that he lost by a landslide had been forged. The High Court is packed with Maduro loyalists and has almost never ruled against his government. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Matt Miller.
All right, Amy, thank you so much. Amy Morris there in D.C. All right, before we go, one story that's caught our attention. We've been teasing it, Crocs. You do have Crocs, right?
Yeah, I bought a pair of what was that?
Are they like
DuckTales?
Are
you know
they
that
like
show
leather from Italy
about
version
the
of
bearded
Crocs?
guys who like hunted ducks? I can't remember what it was called. Anyway, when Duck Dynasty, exactly.
Thank you, Charlie.
I bought a pair of Duck Dynasty Crocs, not because I like the show, but because they're camo.
They're of course, good camo. Do you like them? Do you wear them a lot?
I wear them a decent amount, not a lot, not in public.
So would you wear a pair that was done in a partnership with the actress Sydney Sweeney?
Comes through. No, you know what? The thing is, she is a serious car dude.
Oh,
so
really?
she has worked with Ford, the Ford Motor Company, to customize her own Mustang, and she has her own Bronco. And actually, that's how I got to know her because Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, told me about her. But yeah, she's become a brand ambassador for Crocs line of Hey Dude shoes. Now, Hey Dude is not like the rubber Crocs that you typically think of.
Okay.
They're more of a kind of like a Tom's shoes style, like a very left-wing kind of California surfer thing.
Yeah.
And I think Crocs
also
bought
owned by
them.
Crocs, right?
Yeah, Crocs bought that brand for like $2.5 billion a few years back.
Pretty cute.
And now Sydney Sweeney is the brand ambassador.
Well, what's interesting, Crocs is up, as we said, about 1.3%. The stock's up more than 50% so far this year. And so one of the analysts over at Williams Trading came out, turned bullish on Crocs today, and I guess is citing some of the success that they've had with other partnerships, including one with Post Malone, I think back in 2018. And so they're thinking this one could kind of stir some same interest. But it does, they're cute on little kids, but a lot of adults wear them as well.
Well, they're
especially
just
these partnerships.
easy. If you're skiing, for example, and you slip off your boots.
Are you at that stage in your life that you're like want comfy clothes?
I mean, I've always been a fan of flip-flops, and I think Crocs sometimes are maybe a better option than Birkenstocks.
All right, I'm all in on clogs. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Bloomberg Business Week. If you're watching on television, the close is coming your way in just a moment. Matt and I are going to continue right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we are just 1 hour away from the closing bell on this Thursday, August 22nd. Headline, Matt Miller does not watch Bridgerton.
No. I don't understand
Did your
the
wife
appeal,
watch
frankly.
it? Did your wife watch it?
My wife did watch it, yes.
Good lady, I'm just going to say. All right, coming up over the next couple of hours, we've got a lot going on. I'm Carol Masser. Tim Stanovic is off today. He'll be back tomorrow. Matt Miller sitting in his seat today. We're going to talk about kind of a media mashup. There's a lot going on. We've got the latest on the bid for Paramount. And then
Still going on.
I know, just do something. Just let somebody buy them
I
already.
understand they have a go shop clause, and it's like a month and a half long, and I don't know, maybe it gets extended.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about, speaking of extended, Bob Iger has extended off in his tenure, left the company, came back, but now we're talking about Disney's succession, and Jim Gorman, formerly the head of Morgan Stanley, he's going to lead that race.
That is a guy who nailed his succession plan.
I know, well
right?
done, well done.
With
Very
Ted
cool
Pick,
dude.
They did a good job. A lot of times, people in power, even the most successful ones, drop the ball when it comes to succession.
Not him. So we're going to get into that. We're also going to talk about Elon Musk, a couple stories that have caught our attention, and also check in with Ed Smith-Lewis. He's the Senior VP of Strategy over at the United Negro College Fund, talking about getting more students into the financial pipeline. And then this is our gift to you. We're going to talk about vintage cars.
Nice.
I know, see?
I'm a big fan of the pre-war cars that were kind of the hit at Pebble Beach. But if you look at the auctions, the ones that are actually sold, they're getting younger and younger and younger.
I know. So anyway, that's our gift to you. So that means you got to stick around to the end of the show.
I'll be here.
Can't scoot out early. All right, let's get a check on the trading day. Let's head back to Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. 59 minutes to go ahead of the close now. S&P down 44 at 55.76. That is a drop right now of 0.8%. The Dow in the red as well, down 208, down 0.5%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 1.4%. The NASDAQ 100 Index also down 1.4%. And the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares lower by 0.6%. 10-year at 3.85% with a 2-year 4.00%. Gold now down $30 the ounce to $24.82, a decline of 1.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, $72.86 a barrel. Zoom video communication shares up 12.7% after earnings. Snowflake after earnings down now by 13.6%. And coming up after the close of trading, we will be hearing from both Intuit and Workday. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser along with Matthew Miller. So we do want to get into a couple of media stories that are on our radar. Paramount Global shares up again today. News after the close yesterday, right? The Wall Street Journal first reported, Bloomberg then matched, that media investor Edgar Bronfman Jr. raised his offer to take control of CBS parent Paramount Global. Say that 5 times fast.
Right, and it's really
$6 billion.
Paramount Global Controller National Amusements.
Yeah, I know. It's like,
it's
where's
a
the
deep
wipe?
story.
I know. So following that deep story that never seems to go away is Bloomberg News media reporter Hannah Miller. She joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Blah, I can't speak. Trying to rush to get to you. So we do really have a bidding war for this company now.
We do. Yeah, we had a bigger bid submitted by Bronfman in the midnight hour, as the deadline was up for the go shop period. He actually raised his bid to $6 billion. The initial proposal he had sent in was $4.3 billion. So, he has some backers. He's upped the ante and put pressure on Skydance.
And it's a super complicated structure. So if you can simplify it for us, right? Sherry Redstone, Sumner's daughter, I guess, controls National Amusement, which with like super voting class shares controls Paramount, and the bids between Bronfman and Ellison are not just different in number, but also in how they approach taking it over. So how does Bronfman's bid work?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. They're both similar when it comes to National Amusements, Sherry's company that you just mentioned. It's the same amount of money. They're evaluating it at the same amount. And basically, they're coming in, they're going to buy National Amusements, and then where it differs is the amount of money that's being put into the company for buying stock. So Ellison and Skydance...
Into National Amusement for buying Paramount.
For buying
shares.
Paramount, yes.
Yeah.
So, the total Skydance bid is $8 billion. Bronfman's is $6 billion, and you have to remember that Bronfman actually has to pay a $400 million breakup fee.
I wondered about that.
Yes,
right? Totally.
so you're
Yeah.
taking that out as well. The other thing with the Skydance bid, Skydance will be merged with Paramount, and Bronfman's argument is that that's going to dilute value for shareholders.
Right. Also, there's no such thing as a merger. So what does that mean? The Ellison's Skydance is going to buy Paramount or buy National Amusements to take control of Paramount, and then he's going to make Paramount buy his company, Skydance.
Exactly.
It's crazy. So I don't know. Do you have any indication of what's likely to happen? I mean, and who's going to ultimately? I feel like Sherry's so involved in kind of determining the future of her company with her shares. So what happens next, or what do we think could happen next?
We know she wants to preserve her legacy, so I'm sure both of these bidders are courting her, saying, hey, you can have some say, some involvement here. I think that's been pointed out as one of the potential advantages for the Bronfman bid. The other thing, though,
but does that really ever happen? Like, I feel like when they're dancing together and they're courting, yeah, you're going to have a say, and then a year or two in, we're going to do the story of they're all moving away from each other.
Exactly. It's just going to be about promises. Will that actually happen? Unclear. The thing is, though, David Ellison has extremely deep pockets. He's the son of Larry Ellison. He can throw money in, and he already has offered more money on the table.
Yeah.
I mean, Sherry Redstone has very deep pockets. She's the daughter of Sumner Redstone. Edgar Bronfman Jr. has deep pockets. He's the son of Edgar Bronfman Sr.
Right.
Who else's kid could come into this deal?
It's the battle of the Nepo babies.
It's so funny. Like,
there's a book in here. There's
no
totally a book
value
in
judgment,
here.
but it's like, what can your dad buy from my dad for his dad?
It's a little sad. So could a third bidder come in, or do we even think that that's a possibility?
So that go shop period has been extended until September 5th. So there is time for more bids to be submitted. It could happen, but right now these are the two we were focusing on. These are the two we think are really going to play out over the next few days.
All right, we want to bring in also Bloomberg News entertainment editor Chris Palmieri. He's in our LA bureau. He's been following this and reporting this out along with Hannah. Chris, come on in here. You've been listening to the conversation. I mean, how are you seeing this, or who are you guys hunting down? Who do you want to talk to say, all right, what happens here?
Well, as always with this case, it really comes down to one person, Sherry Redstone. She still controls the majority of the voting stock, and all this is ostensibly being done by the special committee of the board that she's not on. It would be unwise to think she's not the ultimate decider here, and so she signed on reluctantly to the Ellison deal. We're not getting a sense that she's really had a complete change of heart. So, that's what the next 15 days will decide.
What about David Zaslav's dad? Could John Malone come and buy this, Hannah?
I don't know.
Not technically David Zaslav's
I know,
dad.
but I'm just saying, like, the thing is, these are declining assets, right? I mean, they wrote down Paramount wrote down their linear TV networks by $6 billion. Warner Brothers Discovery wrote theirs down by $9 billion. And I keep hearing from people in the know that eventually these two may get together as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a real possibility. I mean, we're just going to see so much consolidation within the media industry going forward. I mean, this is an industry that's struggling.
All right, so one last question to you, Hannah, because we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about Disney with Chris. But so I don't know, is there a date you're watching? Is it what's next here?
Things are unexpected. Things can happen. We're just holding our breath, trying to keep on top of this.
Is there a number that Bronfman could put out there and be like, done?
It's been interesting. He's been trying to gather money from a lot of different backers. So it could happen that he's able to add in additional money to the pot.
All right. Always interesting. Hannah, thank you so much. Hannah Miller, media reporter at Bloomberg News, keeping us up to date on Paramount. We're going to stay with Chris Palmieri. He's also been reporting out the Paramount story, but also we had a story that we got about Disney specifically. And Chris, we actually caught up with you yesterday. You popped on air with us just after the headline crossed about succession planning over at Disney after Bob Iger and the Disney board Disney naming James Gorman, former CEO over at Morgan Stanley. He's going to lead that committee search for a successor to Bob Iger. What more have we learned since that headline crossed?
Well, one thing is the stock market reaction, which is pretty much nothing. And pretty much the stock is flat this year as well. And that's despite Bob Iger, making some things that he's when he came back 2 years ago now, promises that were made. There have been really extensive layoffs, thousands of people. The Disney Plus streaming service is now profitable a quarter earlier than originally planned. The film business, which was really troubled and hadn't made a profit in a couple of years, now seems to have a really good summer. What's a little weaker now is the theme parks, and that had become a huge, huge profit generator. So I think that's sort of what the stock market's going, but they're not really giving Iger credit for that turnaround. And so that's why I think the market's really looking for let's see something in terms of a successor here.
Chris, I do wonder what they need in a Disney CEO. Is it, streaming that matters, the parks business, which we've been talking about for a while, but then had a blip, not so great.
Got to be all about streaming, right?
Well, I don't know. What is it that they're going to look for? This was a company that, was revered under Bob Iger for a long time of having its individual businesses, whether it was Pixar, ESPN, or the theme parks, the cruise business, and then the broadcast. And they all kind of were allowed to do their own thing, although there was great cross-promotion. I don't know. What is the Disney of the future, and what kind of leader do they need?
Well, they said they're also looking at external candidates, and the company's gone back and forth on that strategy over the years. Bob Iger came up through the company. Michael Eisner was hired from someplace else. They have four really senior executives running their businesses. And the only knock against them is that they maybe don't have experience as CEOs themselves in all of the corporate functions that job entails. But the argument for some of them would be, say, Dana Walden, who really kind of runs the TV business, and she's got a lot of relationships with the talent, the writers and actors, and knows that business very well. Josh D'Amaro, who runs the theme parks. That business has been a huge profit engine, and he's very popular, despite all the complaints about higher prices and nickel and diming at the parks. The guy has a social media following. He's well-liked internally and externally.
Interesting.
And so the board is going to have to weigh those qualities and pick the person that's sort of most relevant.
Well, as you said, shares just a little bit lower, and they're a little bit lower today, and they're a little bit lower on the year so far here in 2024. All right, Chris, thanks. Good to check in with you again. Bloomberg News entertainment editor Chris Palmieri. All right, so from the Magic Kingdom to the platform formerly known as Twitter and its fearless leader. There's a few things on
Well, and Silicon Valley at large, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much going on out there, especially with Elon Musk's companies, not just Tesla and Twitter, but also Neuralink. Max Chafkin covers a lot of this stuff for us. But before we get to all of that, I want to throw him a curveball.
What?
I'm ready. I just ordered the Contrarian, so I think you'll see a bump in your revenue there. Max wrote the Contrarian, which is a story about Peter Thiel in Silicon Valley.
What? No.
And it's because he was on the Joe Rogan Experience. Did you listen to Peter Thiel on the Joe Rogan Experience?
It's 3 hours. It's 3 hours long. I actually have not have not made it through the whole thing, and it's been you're sort of hinting at this, but the appearance has been memed. There's a lot of stumbling, a lot of sort of amusing back and forth between Rogan floating various I'd say Rogan interests and Thiel attempting kind of graciously to sidestep those.
It was amazing. First of all, you get a real read on how deep Rogan is into any right-wing conspiracy theory. I mean, he's all in on all of them. And then Peter Thiel seems to kind of debunk them one by one. On the other hand, Rogan asked Peter Thiel, like a couple, in 3 hours, 2 tough questions. And both times, Thiel is just absolutely frozen. He says, how come climate science isn't real science? And Thiel's like, and doesn't have a great answer for it. He also asks, why these left-wing philanthropy businesses are suspicious, and Thiel also freezes there. So I just thought it was just such a fascinating waste of 3 hours. I feel like I need to know more.
All right. Well, I want to know more from Max, because there is a story on the Bloomberg about those that are financing Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. So there is that story. Dana Hall and Rachel Metz putting it out. What do we need to know about that? And what's interesting for you?
Peter Thiel's not an investor in X.
It's not, no Peter Thiel, although plenty of friends of Elon Musk. Peter Thiel and Musk have a sort of fraught relationship. They're more like frenemies. This list, though, a lot of these names are going to be known to people who have followed either X or the whole saga. It's a lot of people who have close ties to Musk. So Larry Ellison, the software billionaire, Bill Ackman of Pershing Square Capital, a Saudi prince, Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia venture capital firms, both of whom have sort of are tied closely with stuff that Musk is doing now. The biggest surprise is that Sean Combs, Diddy, was an investor in the buyout.
So it's interesting to me that, first of all, I love to say Prince Al-Walid bin Talal's name. So I wanted to do that one time. It's super fun. And Bill Ackman is an investor as well. And he has been so heavy, such a heavy super user on Twitter. He even thought he could, I guess, raise and market a closed-end fund with all of his followers, but that was not so successful. Do you get any interesting insight from this list other than kind of the gossipy side of it?
I mean, I think, like I said, we knew a lot of these names because of other lawsuits and so on had shown some of these people. People came up in Elon Musk's text messages, back in 2022, and when he was discussing the buyout. I'd say the acquisition of X and Elon Musk's running it has always been a bit of a head scratcher. It's never totally made sense. Like, as a business, he overpaid for the company, which is part of the reason he tried to get out of it. Right. And for the investors, it's always been a head scratcher. I think really, like, a lot of these guys who are in this company are just like the banks that loaned him the money to do the buyout, are hoping for further connections to Elon Musk, to be involved in whatever the next deal is.
Well, maybe they should get a chip put into their brain. No easy segue. Only got about 45 seconds. So I'm sorry, Max, because the little Rogan thing ate up some time. What do we need to know, though, about this second implantation?
So, yeah, Neuralink, that's Elon Musk's brain implant company, announced they put a chip in a second patient. Now, I should say the chip essentially allows the patients who are paralyzed, unable to like move a mouse, a cursor mouse, or type. Before this, they're able to basically use a computer. It's exciting, but very, very, very early days. I mean, this is like the earliest kind of clinical trial. It's not even a clinical trial. It's like a preliminary investigation. So it's going to be many years before we see any of this commercially, at least from Elon Musk, although certainly good news for Musk and for his company Neuralink.
Always pretty cool stuff. Listen, Max, thank you so much, and thanks for putting up with Matt Miller.
I think, you know what? I'm so excited to read this book because you're going to learn more. You need to learn more about somebody who essentially is trying to buy himself into the White House,
We actually have had Max on to talk about the book. A lot.
I missed that episode.
We kind of, think it's pretty cool. All right, Max Chafkin, Bloomberg Businessweek columnist, contributed to the Elon Inc. podcast and his book, The Contrarian.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. 39 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks lower. We're very close to session lows on the S&P, down 47, 55.73 right now, a drop of 0.8%. Dow Industrials down 194 points for the Dow, a decline right now of 0.5%. Nasdaq, the composite index, down 1.5%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares down 0.5%. 10-year at 3.85%, the 2-year 4.00%. Spot gold down $31 the ounce to $24.81, down 1.2%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.4%, $72.90 for a barrel of WTI. Wall Street's looking ahead to tomorrow's speech by Fed Chair Jay Powell in Jackson Hole, and any hints about interest rate policy. Tracy McMillian is head of global asset allocation at Wells Fargo.
So, when we're thinking about a 25 basis point or a 50 basis point, we're probably not going to get that information from Powell tomorrow, but it's likely to hinge on the jobs numbers that come out right before that Fed meeting.
And you can hear more of the conversation with Tracy McMillian of Wells Fargo on the Bloomberg Intelligence podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. We're keeping an eye on Peloton Interactive shares, now up by 39% after reporting revenue and profit that beat analyst estimates. After the close of trading today, we will be hearing from both Intuit and Workday. Recapping, S&P down 51, drop right now of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Okay, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Masser along here with Matt Miller. He's in for Tim Stenovic right here on Bloomberg Business Week. All right, so I got some numbers for you.
Okay.
Our Bloomberg News team put this out. That wellness, it's a big global business. It's about $5.6 trillion in revenue back in 2022. This is from the Global Wellness Institute. It's a big industry group. And they say research from the nonprofit organization says the industry has grown from $3.4 trillion in 2013. I'm throwing a lot of numbers. And by 2027, it's expected to grow an additional 57% to $8.5 trillion, about twice as large as Germany's gross domestic product.
Okay.
There'll be a test at the end of this.
Did you know that 76.1% of stats are made up?
Why do you say that?
I mean, how do you classify what people spend on wellness or not?
Well,
when I buy water, is that wellness spend?
Every time you buy something, there's data collection, like there's stuff. Anyway, let's get to somebody who's got their own report on wellness and health and what consumers are actually thinking about their own state of health. The Carney Consumer Institute has done some work. Katie Thomas is with us. She's lead at the Carney Consumer Institute with us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you have some comments on data, but let's go to your research. How are you?
I'm doing well, Carol. How are you? Matt already scooped, basically my whole brief by saying that is water wellness or not? Those are the exact kind of questions we were asking. So.
I played pickleball the last 2 nights, and it was $15 a session. Was that $30 spent on wellness this week?
Yes, right?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, so I think you're asking the exact right question, which is, our motivation going into this was to understand a little bit more how actual people talk about health and wellness as opposed to how we tend to bucket it when we talk about it from sort of a consumer trend or spend perspective. When we talk to people about health, it's a lot more higher order than these simple decisions that we're talking about here, whether it's pickleball or even GLP-1s or the sober curious movement. People have much headier ways of thinking about health, but they also feel like they know how to make healthy decisions. So that's an area where as we look at these health and wellness trends and we keep kind of hammering home the communication of this is how to be healthier, most people don't actually need that messaging. They either are defining it for themselves or they already know how to do it.
Wait, so why did you do this? How do you guys take this and then either help your clients or find productive material and, help to make productive decisions out of it?
Yeah, so what we really do is, honestly, it's in response to the fact that everyone feels like they have to kind of jump at every little blip you see on the radar. So whether it's electrolyte powders or, gut health or I've got to move and make these small shifts to all these little ticky-tacky health and wellness trends. And what we found is if you have a better understanding of a consumer's overall lifestyle, that will be a lot more impactful. So I think a great recent example of this is McDonald's actually taking salads off off the menu, right? Because they realize that when people go there, they're probably not looking for a salad, and there may just be other ways they define health from McDonald's. So it's not going all the way to a salad. Maybe it's grilled chicken tenders, things like that. So it's really starting to kind of translate some of the overall lifestyle considerations and where people make trade-offs and kind of couch things as health, like we said, as opposed to feeling like you have to overcorrect just because some small health and wellness, little trend is bubbling up.
I've been buying acai bowls lately.
My daughter loves acai bowls.
Although they're packed with sugar, so I'm not sure if it's much different than ice cream.
I've known you for such a long time when you weren't an acai bowl kind of guy.
Yes, well, I mean, look, I'm leaning more into it because I'm getting older.
Is that why you've done it? A lot of it?
I mean, yeah, of course. I want to live longer. I don't want to die of a heart attack and get diabetes. But you know what? I'm in a very large cohort, right? I mean, we're seeing, I was talking to Alan Patrikoff today, a famous VC investor.
Invests in longevity.
In longevity. Yeah. His new company, Primetime, invests in trying to make life better for people who are older, and there are more people over 60 than there are under 18. So we're definitely, directionally, that's where we're headed, right, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what we're seeing here is just like a preference for preventative health as opposed to some of the other, again, smaller things we've seen as a response to health lately. And then also, of course, factoring in mental health. And that's where some of this really starts to blur, is sometimes there's this inherent conflict with health of what's traditionally physically healthy as it relates to perhaps diet and exercise. And then what's sort of that self-care bucket, right? Like, having ice cream once a week or a glass of wine is sort of taking care of myself. It's good for my mental health. And so it's really, that's part of the journey, is figuring out for consumers and each brand's individual consumers, what are those trade-offs people are making? How are they defining health? What matters most to them? Like where they're going to kind of make a sacrifice. Like a lot of people still don't eat healthy things because simply they don't taste good. And then there's a lot of products like some of those electrolyte powders that's exactly why they're doing well, is because people don't like plain water. So it's really just like trying to bring all of those things together and strike the right balance to figure out what health really means to consumers.
I mean, I spend $6, at least $6 a week on a 12-pack of flavored seltzer water. Like the flavored seltzer water section at my grocery is now an entire aisle.
I know. It's like kind of crazy. I am just kind of blown away. I mean, and I feel like all we should do is be drinking water, to be quite honest.
I actually quit drinking, Katie, 2 years ago. I've been California sober for 2 years. What do you think about weed?
I mean, I think that's a great example of one way some consumers would claim that's not healthy and some would say it is healthy. I think sort of in a similar vein, Matt, we asked in our study what people think about GLP-1s versus like having more of a body positivity, self-acceptance message. 90% of people said self-acceptance was actually healthier body positivity messages as compared to GLP-1. So, I mean, I think you see all these trade-offs. Same goes with weed. Some people would say, hey, sober, not California sober. Others would say, do what you got to do that works for your lifestyle.
All right. So we're in an economy that some would say that there are a lot of, I think it's not even some, I think it's safe to say that there are a lot of Americans out there that are just struggling to kind of get by month to month. So having said that, I don't know if something came up in your survey about, when the economy's tough, it's harder to make those smarter, healthier decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of what we saw, about 1 in 3 consumers said that finances are one of the things that stand in the way of them being healthier. And then 1 in 4 said access. So maybe not being able to, get to the right foods or get to a gym or what have you. So there certainly are trade-offs that happen there. But part of the other challenge that we're calling out with this brief is the issue with health washing, which is sort of similar to greenwashing, where everyone's throwing every claim on pack that they can. It's just ultimately confusing consumers when really we should be looking at, public health and public policy for more consistent messages on fresh fruits and vegetables and all of that, and just like being thoughtful about what the whole lifestyle looks like and where consumers can kind of make those trade-offs.
You got your undergrad in Ann Arbor, right? You got your MBA in Chicago. You're in Pittsburgh right now. You're like a solidly Midwest girl.
That's right.
Is it easier? Is it easier there because you're closer to the farms and natural food, or do you think on the coasts? I mean, is there a difference between like flyover country and New York and LA?
just to clarify, those of us from Pittsburgh don't actually consider ourselves Midwestern. So I never grew up being Midwestern, but no, just to nitpick. But no, but I am. Well, let's be honest. No, I think you do get a little bit of both. So it depends on what you're looking access to. The nice thing about middle of the country is it does tend to be a little bit more affordable. But it really just kind of depends on. Again, it goes back to what people define as healthy. So is healthy local versus organic? And there are arguments to be made in either way. If you're getting meat that's organic versus something that's maybe not organic, but hasn't, the supply chain is a lot shorter. I think once again, you get into those same sort of debates, and that's the whole challenge with health and wellness is you can kind of call anything health and wellness.
All right. Well, this was fun. California sober.
I liked it.
I know. People are Googling.
I'm a Midwestern boy as well. I will point out.
Yes.
Go Buckeyes.
I thought you were good. Oh no, I was going to say go blue. I have a Jim Harbaugh bobblehead behind me. Sorry, Matt. We'll have to agree to disagree.
The bane of my existence. They're good lately,
I love it. Yeah. Katie Thomas, thanks so much. Be well. She's lead at the Carney Consumer Institute, joining us there in Pittsburgh. Organic? Natural? What do you buy?
You know what? I will be honest. I was all about organic for years until I moved here and had kids and money got tight. I used to have so much disposable income as a single guy. And now that I'm married and I pay Westchester taxes and I'm paying college administration prices for preschool, I just buy whatever's cheapest.
I know it changes, right? When you have kids, everything's expensive. All right. Hey, listen, folks, more to come. We're going to talk a little bit more about the markets. Right now, though, World and National News with Amy Morris in D.C. Amy.
All right, thank you, Carol. The Democratic National Convention culminates tonight. Kamala Harris has an acceptance speech as the party's presidential nominee. Evan Roth-Smith is lead pollster with the Democratic polling firm Blueprint.
Kamala Harris has a lot of work to do to define herself on the economy, a lot of work to do to convince voters that she meets what they want to see out of Democratic policy on inflation and prices, at the border. And she's begun to do that.
Democratic pollster Evan Roth-Smith. British tech tycoon Mike Lynch has died. He was 59 years old. His death in the sinking of a yacht during a severe storm off the coast of Italy was confirmed by people with direct knowledge of the matter who asked not to be identified. One of his two daughters remains among those unaccounted for. The luxury yacht outing was a celebration with a small group of advisors of Lynch's recent acquittal on fraud charges. The Arkansas Supreme Court has upheld the state's rejection of signature petitions in favor of putting an abortion rights initiative on the November ballot. The ruling dashes the hopes of abortion rights supporters to have voters decide the issue in the predominantly Republican state. Petition organizers had enough signatures. The state, though, said they needed to document paid signature gatherers and not submit that information separately. And U.S. regulators have signed off on an updated COVID-19 vaccine designed to more closely target more recent virus strains and hopefully whatever variants crop up. This latest clearance will allow Pfizer and Moderna to begin shipping millions of doses, and Novavax expects its modified vaccine to be available a little later. Global news 24 hours a day whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. Here at Bloomberg, we have got stocks trading very close to session lows. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks in the red right now after a positive start. The Dow's currently down 214 points. S&P's dropped 54, and NASDAQ, that's lower by 1.7%. The U.S. 10-year yield rises to 3.86%. Gold is down 1.3%. Oil trading in the green, and Bitcoin, that's also lower by 1.6%. Regarding the main 11 S&P sectors, only energy, financials, and real estate were in the green. Technology and consumer discretionary were under pressure. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, JP Morgan and American Express, while Intel fell 5.6% and led to the downside. After earnings, Snowflake fell 13%, and Advanced Auto Parts dropped as much as 22%. And wrapping things up, some of the names pointing up to the bell tonight include Kava, Intuit, and Workday. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney, to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg. Type Squawk, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, he's definitely dancing a little bit. We're getting closer to the closing bell, about 18 minutes away here. We've got stocks pretty much near their lows of the session. Charlie, of course, just breaking down the numbers. I do feel like, Matt, we're kind of all waiting for.
At one point, we were just 0.5% away from another record high,
I know,
right?
I
We're
know.
looking for 56.67. We got closer and closer to that on the S&P 500, and then we just fell away.
Yeah, I think we're kind of running out of steam, but maybe just waiting for Jay Powell tomorrow. Let's see what our Drive to the Close guest has to say about it all. Hamilton Lane is co-CEO. He is actually, I should say, Hamilton Lane co-CEO Eric Hirsch, and he joins us from Pennsylvania. Good to have you here with us, Eric. How are you? And just let's start big and broad. When you look at the market environment, what are the kind of things that you are focusing on? Is it Jay Powell tomorrow? Or is it something else?
So it's not Powell tomorrow, and again, happy to be here. So I think we know what we're going to hear tomorrow. I think we're going to clearly start to see rates coming down, but I think sort of from our perspective, sort of the concerns of recession or hard landing are sort of just grossly overstated right now. We're just not seeing the consumer spending in the areas that really matter and drive the economy. We're just not seeing those let up.
I mean, all of the sort of standout consumer issues and earnings reports have been down arrow stories, right? Like they're not booking enough at TripAdvisor or at Airbnb. We're not seeing growth to Disney's parks. Even, people at Walmart, if they're buying more stuff, but it's actually sort of wealthy people coming down from, higher end stores.
I've done that. I've traded down on brands like for things like, plastic bags or something. Like, I'm like, I'm okay
you
with
buy
no name.
plastic bags?
I know.
You're an evil person, Carol.
Oh, I do. You're
All right,
Come on,
so
Carol, you can't be buying plastic bags.
Yeah, seriously. No, on the other hand, if you look at the retail sales numbers, they're good. If you look at GDP numbers, they're good. So,
That's the issue, Matt. I think we got to be careful to not sort of conflate pieces here. Just because Disney's theme parks aren't growing is very different than saying Disney's theme parks aren't still pretty full. And so to me, when we talk about recession, hard landing, we need to see Disney theme parks coming way down. We need to see airline travel coming way down. We need to see restaurants empty. We need to see restaurant pricing way down. And that we're just not seeing. I think what we have is a real bifurcation in the consumer. There is no question that the bottom end of the consumer is getting hit hard. There is some social issues around that. There are some tragic issues around that, but they are truly struggling. The middle class and the upper class, however, are continuing to crank away. And again, for a lot of them, higher rates have actually been a real benefit to cash in the pocket.
So you guys have about $940 billion in assets under management and supervision. So I'm just curious, I know you focus a lot on the private markets. What are you doing with your client money? And by the way, I do buy a few Ziplocs, but I use I have all reusable bags. I don't use plastic bags in the supermarket or anything anymore before I get a lot of hate mail, although I might get some hate mail for Ziplocs. So having said that, what do you do with client money?
So we've been active. We're deploying, we have a lot of capital, our clients have a lot of capital, and we are deploying a lot of capital. The private markets, I think, very different than kind of the public market dynamic, are continuing to expand. There are just more and more private companies getting created, and whether it's here in the US or outside the US, whereas on the public market side, the number of publicly traded companies around the globe, that is not a big growing group of companies. And so that is generally shrinking in most markets, as being public is challenging, it's expensive, it's time consuming. We know we are public. And so I think for a lot of investors, they want to get access to the sort of the broader growing part of the economy, and that tends to be the private side. Specifically, there's been a couple of areas that I think are attracting a lot of the capital in a good way. One, private credit. So regional banks really kind of hamstrung in this environment, out of the lending business. Private credit has sort of stepped in and filled that gap. Infrastructure, whether it's here in the US or in Europe, there is real need for major infrastructure spending. And so private infrastructure really is going to be the gap filler relative to what the governments are doing. So those are two interesting areas with interesting return characteristics.
I wonder what you think about the aging population in healthcare, because we've had investor after investor on my show, Bloomberg Open Interest, mornings from 9 to 11 on Bloomberg Television.
Shameless plug, but go ahead.
Who are saying, you know what, the demographics are so compelling, and pricing power is definitely there when it comes to saving your life. I mean, look how many people are willing to pay $1,000 a month for GLP-1s. Is that trade still not too crowded?
Well, we know, Matt, that acai bowls are not going to be the only solution for healthcare. So we're going to have to do more than just that. And I think that is an interesting trade. So healthcare, whether it's in the pharma space, whether it's in the service provider space. So again, aging population of boomers with a lot of capital. I don't expect that we're going to see all of them heading into kind of group-run facilities. There's going to be an awful lot of care at home, and that is going to create an incredible growth in private nursing. That's been a big area for the private markets, private healthcare providers, and sort of general home health. Those are other big areas for good capital absorption.
Hey, one thing I want to ask you, though, about private credit specifically, and listen, the last few years at Milken, and I've been there, it's like that's all anybody ever talks about. It's not the public markets, it's private credit. Having said that, you have increasingly more and more big firms that have gotten involved in private credit. You've got new market entrants. And so that extra competition has definitely pushed down some of those returns. What are you seeing on your private credit return investments?
So I would say a couple of things can be true. We can see more capital coming in. We can see more entrants coming in. We can see the big getting bigger. They are. That gap and that void that the banks have left, very large. And the amount of dry capital that's sort of sitting there in the private markets that needs to be deployed, and oh, by the way, leverage buyouts, they're going to largely get financed by private credit. They're not going to go into the bond market to do that. That game is largely moved away again from not only the regional banks, but sort of the big bracket banks are not the big providers anymore of kind of the lending capital inside of a leverage buyout. And so we're still seeing the returns being very resilient. You got to be careful, again, not to say that every private credit manager is fantastic and no one's going to have any issues. That's not true. But again, this is kind of picking and choosing. But if I'm painting with a broad brush, I would say returns there look very good.
Very good is what? 16%, 20%, 10%?
Yeah, I would say, again, we're talking about credit with credit protection. So I think what you're talking about is kind of a 9 to 13% rate of return. And again, on a relative basis to what you're sort of seeing in the public markets for credit risk with very low leverage ratios, I think a lot of investors are really happy to go take home a 10% rate of return.
All right, going to leave it on that note. Hey, Eric, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Eric Hirsch, he's the co-chief executive officer at Hamilton Lane, joining us there from Pennsylvania. I mean, everybody's been talking about private credit for a while.
For a couple of years now.
I still feel like there's some transparency issues.
And you still do get a great return, as he said, from cash. And then you have it there in case you get a manic Monday like we had on August 5th to go in and buy some bargains.
All right, well, we shall see. All right, everybody, just got about 10 minutes left in today's trading session. Matt and I are going to count you down. Head over to our TV colleagues. Closing bell coming your way in just a moment.
Company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We are minutes away from the latest earnings out of Intuit and Workday. Right now, we got Intuit down 0.9%. Workday ahead of earnings, down now by 0.7%. A day after that 12.9% plunge for Macy's, the stock is down again today, falling another 1.6% in its earnings report. The retailer cited, among other things, a more discriminating consumer. So what might Macy's suggest about the broader retail environment and the economy? Victoria Fernandez is chief market strategist at Crossmark Global Investments.
Macy's been struggling for a while. They are that middle-income consumer that is really having to pull back on discretionary spending as some of their more non-discretionary items like food continue to move higher. So definitely a bifurcation that we're seeing in retail. Some of your low-cost providers are gaining share and doing better, while that middle-income consumer store is really starting to struggle.
Crossmark's Victoria Fernandez, and you can hear more of the conversation on the Surveillance podcast. Download it wherever you get your podcasts. Williams-Sonoma reported net revenue for the second quarter that missed the average analyst estimate. Stock selling off today yesterday. The retailer now down by 9.2%. Sticking with retail, Urban Outfitters shares lower after the owner of the Anthropologie and Free People brands posted quarterly sales growth that came in below Wall Street expectations. Comparable sales in its retail segment rose 2%, below analysts' average estimate of 2.9%. Urban Outfitters shares, they're down now by 9.66%. And those are some of our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, in just a few minutes, Matt and I are going to head over to our TV colleagues, count you down to the closing bell on this. I'm going to call it Powell's Eve.
I like that. Powell's Eve is
Thank
very
you.
good.
Right?
The thing is, I think we're going to struggle to get anything from him tomorrow. I think he's not going to push back on a 25 basis point cut. And he's also not going to offer anything more aggressive than that, say going to 50.
Might he say we're going to have a few data points before that September
And
meeting?
we do.
And we will watch them very closely.
And they will.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, how many times do we have to be reminded?
They are
Data
dependent. Yeah, exactly. So it'll be, this is what we do here, right? Like we parse every little word. I feel like we constantly live from counting down from, Powell event to Powell event to Powell event. I get it because we're on the cusp of the Fed after aggressively raising rates very fast, very rapidly, and then now we're getting ready for the Fed to go in the other
Carol,
direction.
you and I have been doing it throughout.
How long?
Greenspan
Bernanke,
to Bernanke,
Yellen,
to Yellen, to Powell. I mean,
I think I remember. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Don't say Paul Volcker.
I'm not going to say Paul Volcker, but you know what's so interesting? I think about the days we used to walk in and it was like a surprise rate move.
Yeah.
I can't even remember. Well, did we get one? Did we get one pre-pandemic? Did we get something?
A surprise rate move? You mean in this administration? Because I remember when Greenspan was like holding his cards pretty close to his vest.
Yeah.
They didn't tell you what they were going to do. The thing is with Powell's Fed, they're not going to do anything that they haven't already telegraphed.
I feel
4 months.
Okay, and this is not a criticism, but I feel very managed.
Yeah.
Do you remember with Greenspan, it would be like the suitcase? Is it thick?
Yes.
Is it not? Like
exactly.
It was the suitcase indicator or his briefcase indicator. And if it was thick, it was considered okay. I think we're going to get some kind of
congressional testimony as well. He really told them what he thought.
Productivity, we talk about productivity gains constantly. And then there was rational exuberance.
Yeah.
Right? All this
Irrational
stuff.
exuberance. And then we had Ben Bernanke on 60 Minutes saying, you know what, if we get inflation, we can stop that on a dime. That's not the problem that we're worried about. And this Fed has fought inflation for 2 years.
Matt and I are going to go sit on our rockers and go down memory lane.
Ah, the good old days.
I'm going to bring out my knitting. Matt, I know what you're going to do.
Talk about high school football, baby.
We got some of that last night. All right, folks, we're heading over to our TV colleagues. We're going to count you down to the close on this Thursday. We've got stocks hovering near their lows of this session. Time for the closing bell on radio, TV, and across our platforms.
Market action today. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic here with Alex Steele, taking you through the closing bell. A global simulcast. It starts right now. Scarlet Fu wheeling here into the TV studio. Carol Massar.
Hello.
Showing up once again here in the radio booth, but Tim Stenivek taking the day off. Matt Miller filling in. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg
Did he just
platforms.
take off his glasses
and
like
Matt
he was a
doing his best
superhero?
Clark Kent impression there. So we'll start with you, Matt, since you just took off your glasses and you look so serious here. Step on Carol's toes and tell us what you think of the market today.
You know what? I was not surprised that we saw the market turn a little bit lower. We got the initial jobless claims that were bang in line, but revisions added another 1,000 people to the dole. So we're seeing these revisions. We saw yesterday another 818,000 added or taken away in terms of jobs from the year through March to the downside. So the economy is looking a little bit weaker, but not so much weaker that we're going to get 50 basis points. And I think that's what the market's a little bit disappointed about
Can
today.
we just rip rip off the Powell, Band-Aid and just get through it and let's see what he has to say. Or if he doesn't, he's probably going to do, right, Scarlett, this really great Fed dance and balance that he has become really good at.
Yeah, he's not going to say anything to disrupt the markets, and he's not going to change his tune in one speech. I liked what I read in a note earlier, which is higher for longer is going to turn to slower to lower.
Slower to lower. Oh, man, that's going to hurt my head a little bit there. But, guys, I got to say, you look at the markets, it's the chips, it's the semis that are getting hit. It has nothing to do with what Fed Chair Jay Powell is going to say tomorrow.
All right, well, maybe we can get Tom Keene to take Powell out to the Pioneer Grill, get him liquored up here, and maybe he'll say something of significance tomorrow. Meanwhile, for today, a bit of market repositioning, erasing most of the gains that we have seen over the past few sessions here. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is going to finish the day down by about 0.4%, and we should point out that's basically your outperformer on the day amongst the major indices. The S&P 500 down 0.9%. The NASDAQ Composite down about 1.7%, and the Russell 2000 is going to close the day down by about 21 points or 1% on the day.
All right, guys, we've got Intuit crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Fourth quarter net revenue, slight beat, $3.18 billion versus an estimate of $3.09 billion. Fourth quarter adjusted EPS, folks, also better than forecast, $1.99 versus an estimate of $1.85. The outlook, the company saying it sees 2025 revenue of $18.16 billion to $18.35 billion. That is above, at least the high end, above the estimate of $17 billion. And then also sees first quarter adjusted EPS of $2.33 a share to $2.38. That is below the estimate of $2.80. And you've got shares of Intuit, guys, down about 2.3% here in the aftermarket.
All right, we'll continue to keep an eye on how that stock moves. In the meantime, let's just go back to what we saw today in the cash market, because it was kind of a steady decline in price action for the S&P and the major indexes. And when you look at the sector performances, you really have some asymmetry when it comes to the groups that declined. Tech stocks losing 2% on the day, consumer discretionary losing 1.9%.
All right, we're looking at Ross Stores also coming across the wire with earnings. EPS in the second quarter, $1.59. That beats the estimate for $1.49. So it looks like, at least on the bottom line, Ross is doing better than expected. It's interesting, we have seen some companies come out today, Peloton, for example, that did better in terms of margins, but weren't able to move the needle at all on the top line. And that actually has helped Peloton stock. We'll see how these Ross estimates come in, because so far we've only got the EPS out. I got to comb through the release to look for the sales.
Well, it's versus yeah, you're right. Just got that number versus $1.32 a year ago, and an estimate of $1.49. It looks like sales $5.29 billion, and that's up about 7.1% from the year before. Estimate is $5.25 billion, so a little bit more coming out here.
All right, I'm taking a look at Workday here. So it's a cloud company. Taking a look at adjusted earnings coming in about $1.75. That is a beat. You're also, revenue up 17% year on year, coming in at $2.09 billion. That also beats subscription revenue up 17%, professional services revenue up 12%, and the backlog looks relatively solid as well.
Yeah, interesting too. They're also announcing a partnership here with Equifax here. So you talk about a company that really has started to expand, or at least try to expand its base of operations, and at least that's paying off. It looks like, at least based on these numbers, on the margins already, definitely a beat there on an adjusted basis, 24.9%.
Yeah, and they're also saying that they're slightly raising their expectations for 2025 non-GAAP operating margin, as Romain was saying, expanding really in North America as well. Impressive too, because customers have been shifting their IT budget to AI products versus the kind of cloud products that Workday might offer. So solid beat potentially on that end.
All right, guys, we're going to go back to some of the individual movers as we continue to track some of the earnings coming out here. Peloton Interactive, man, up 35% here, surging off the charts here. The company came out, reported earnings that beat analyst estimates. They are kind of signaling maybe that their turnaround efforts are starting to bear fruit. We talked with our Mark Gurman, and he was a little surprised at why this is so upbeat. And, we're going to have to see what happens with this company going forward. Keep in mind, it is way down from its January 2021 high.
167 was the high, right?
I know. It's down like 97% from that. So a long way from what that company was, certainly, and when it was a pandemic darling. Zoom, we talked about the earnings after the close yesterday, finishing the day just shy of a 13% gain, surging the most in more than 1.5 years. Company reported second quarter results. That was a beat, raised its full year forecast, talked about new AI and contact centers products continuing to deliver. We did also get news that the company said the CFO would resign. Nothing seems to be a disagreement agreement with the company, and they have begun a search for the successor. And Paramount Global, the story that keeps on giving. We continue to see, we know we got some news yesterday after the close about Edgar Bronfman raising his offer. So Paramount, once again, building on the gains of yesterday of about 1.4%, up another 0.8% here, Matt.
All right, Alex, to your point, that is the chips that are down today, and certainly NVIDIA is leading us down the S&P 500. Intel had a very bad day. They had a director, Lip Bhutan, who was brought in years ago to help turn the company around. He was named to the board in 2022. He was on the M&A committee. Well, he's out of there, at least according to people familiar with the situation. Intel has declined to comment. Tom didn't respond to a request for comment. In any case, you can see those shares right now down more than 6% at the close. Advanced Auto Parts, much smaller company, much bigger loss. The shares were off almost a fifth, I think. If you look at Advanced Auto Parts, the plunge was the most since May of 2023. There you see, 18%. It slashed its annual profit forecast by more than analysts expected. Also, you may have seen that Carlyle came in and bought its WorldPac unit. That's the OEM parts sales unit. Carlyle spent $1.5 billion for that. Snowflake shares fell as well. The software maker reported second quarter results and gave an outlook that didn't necessarily miss. In fact, the results beat on a couple of key metrics, but analysts are worried about product revenue and the gross margin forecasts. And then Urban Outfitters. I didn't even know it was still a store.
It's still a store. It's a super hot store.
Okay, still a super. All right. Anyway,
wait till your daughters get older, right, Alex?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
All right. So they own
Anthropologie, if that helps any.
Anthropologie. My mom loves it. You know, Free People. She loves that store as well. Quarterly sales growth was less than Wall Street expected. 2% was what they posted on comp sales. The street was only looking for 3%, but they couldn't hit it. And as a result, the stock is down. Executives on a call today were saying they may have to add more promotions, they may have to add markdowns. So you can take your kids to Urban Outfitters. I'll take my mom to Free People, and we'll get them some stuff for cheaper.
Hey, I only shop on sale. So you're speaking my language right now. I'm taking a look at the bond market. You definitely had a sell-off across the curve, particularly in the front end. You got 2-year yields up by about 8 basis points. Also, guys, looking at money market funds yet again, hitting another record high. Again, you got $6.24 trillion. Does that actually belong anywhere? And does it belong to the bond market? Does it belong to the equity market? Or does it stay there?
All right, we go back to some of the earnings crossing the wire. I mean, we're just talking about Ross Stores, so those shares higher on the day by about 5% in after-hours trading. Meanwhile, Workday still remains in the red, although we are learning that the company did authorize a buyback of about $1 billion worth of shares. That did pare some of the losses here in the after-hours trade, but you can see Workday still down about 2%.
Yeah, and you've got Intuit, right? Also coming out, their board approving a new $3 billion share buyback authorization. You've got shares of Intuit in the after hours up about 2.4%. So a little bit of a different trade for those guys.
I'm sorry, can we talk about these new Crocs stiletto shoes?
Because you love Crocs, don't you?
Are they called Hey Dudes?
Hey Dudes. Stiletto shoes? Crocs? Stiletto?
Yes, put a picture of these shoes. Well, those aren't them. You got to Carol, explain this to the people.
Well, actually, what's really interesting is Matt Miller actually brought this to my attention.
Matt
and
likes these?
I think it's because Sydney Sweeney is in the story.
My favorite actress.
Gotcha. Okay.
She is like, what do you get?
Careful.
Golden Globes.
Cut Matt off, please. Who knows where he's going?
They have heels like stiletto heels?
Yeah, do we not have a photo of this thing?
I'm looking for
anyway,
pictures.
Apparently we don't. Anyway, there's a great story on the system. A new pair of Crocs. This is under the Hey Dude brand, but it's stiletto heels.
I haven't seen the
stilettos. And you have to see them to believe them. But
I've only
we
seen
can't see them now.
The Hey Dude brand shoes that Sydney is repping, my girl Sydney, those are like Toms. They're like sort of hippie dude surfer shoes.
Or old man shoes.
Yes.
Or that.
Sorry.
Yes.
I
see what this
stilettos.
is. I get you. I would totally wear those.
The Crocs stilettos, right?
I would totally do it.
No, those are not a good look.
Wait.
I don't know. They're kind of fun.
Wait, now I got to pull them up. Totally would wear them.
Right?
Are we really missing
Totally
this
wear
chance
them.
to put Sydney Sweeney
Oh my God.
video
Yeah,
up?
we blew this. We could have shown Sydney Sweeney. We could have shown these ugly Crocs. We could let Matt just, bury himself with whatever he was going to say about Sydney.
You know, when I showed this to Matt, you know he's going to be all in.
You know she's into cars, so she designed her own Mustang, she designed her own Bronco. I actually know about her because Jim Farley told me about her from Ford.
All right, to be continued, guys, okay? I'm just going to say. All right, I'm going to take off a couple of days again. So,
I love these.
I know, right, Alex?
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know. I'm into it. What can I say?
All right, on that note, that is a wrap. I think Alex is going off to buy the shoes right now.
Bye-bye.
And we know Scarlett and Romain are going to continue, and then Matt and I are going to continue on this end. All right, guys, we'll see you again for our simulcast.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Do I not hear my mic? Oh, there it is.
Push the blue button.
No, I had it on. I think I had the volume low.
Yeah.
Because I sometimes blow my ear out. All right, we're going to push Crocs to the side. We're going to stay with the markets for a moment because we've got a good guest to get into it. We've got the founder and chief investment officer at ValueWorks, Charles Lemonides, joining us from New York City. Charles, nice to have you back here on Bloomberg. I can't promise you that Crocs won't come into our conversation. Having said that, it's kind of a mellow market, and as I said, I think we're kind of waiting. It's like Powell's Eve. We're waiting to see. Although, as we just said, we're probably not going to get anything earth-shattering from Jay Powell tomorrow.
No. In fact, I would put a lot of money that he doesn't surprise us. He typically, that's the whole point of this Fed. They want to telegraph everything.
Isn't that actually a Fed doing, it's like being, I don't know.
Well, I mean,
they talk a lot.
If you buy into this era of the Fed, they want to be transparent, and they want you to know what they're going to do before they do it. Now, previous central banks have done it differently.
All right. So what do you make of it, Charles, and some of the market moves we've seen? Is it all about what the Fed does and just kind of figuring it out exactly right?
Well, we've had just a tremendous amount of volatility over the past month or so. And it really came out of nowhere. It was a summer squall that came up, and the markets have been buffeted like crazy. And it's interesting because we went for a year and a half or so with very, very, very modest moves. And then over the past month, we've had massive gyrations. And I think it has more to do with where the market's been than with what the economy's doing or with what's changed.
In terms of what to expect, I noticed the market is now pricing in a 25 basis point cut at every one of the next 5 meetings. Does this economy really feel like one that needs, consistent and consecutive rate cuts?
I'd be super surprised if this economy needs that. People noted that the job growth was lower than it has been in the past for July. But it's still job growth, and it's still significant job growth, and it's still significant job growth at very, very close to full employment. And there's also the fact that I think there's a ton of underlying demand. We've seen some pause in the consumer, and some companies are talking about weakness, but by and large, most companies are still having a hard time filling keeping their supply chain full and getting products to customers. So I don't think the economy even comes close to needing 5 rate cuts over the next 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half. The Fed's telling you they're going to cut a little, and that's okay because rates are, pretty high on Fed funds. But I don't think this economy needs massive rate cuts. And in terms of what the market's pricing in, man, they have priced it in wrong for the past 12 months.
Got to ask you, you guys are, at your core, obviously, value investors. So what's it like to be a value investor right now in this environment?
Well, it's really interesting because these gyrations have given us great entry points, I think, for a couple of names that are really exciting. Also, I think it's important to distinguish between what type of value investor is going to perform well and which one won't. I think we're going into a heady period in the markets. We've had this massive gyration over the past 6 weeks where value outperforms, small cap outperforms, small cap gets crushed, mega cap takes off. But I think that longer term, you're looking at a year, 2 years, 4 years, I think we're going into a very excited market top because, I believe in cycles. And I don't think we've been at a massive top for 20 years or 25 years. And I think we're due to go into one. And I don't think it'll be value stocks that take you there. It's going to be growth stocks that take you there. So our strategy is to try to buy companies that we think are real growth companies, that we value like growth companies, and that are trading at value prices today.
I was just going to ask about that. Growth at a reasonable price. one of my favorite acronyms, GARP. Where do you find those? I mean, are they plentiful right now? Because the big growth stocks we all know, by heart, and they're, trading for trillions.
They are trading, some of them, they're all, the big ones are trading for trillions. However, that doesn't mean they're all expensive. In fact, we used the last swoon to step into Amazon. Now, obviously, we all know Amazon and understand the investment performance of that stock over the past 25 years. But the fact of the matter is, Amazon has been dead money for 4 years now. I mean, it got to $160 a share 4 years ago. We stepped into it in the 160-ish per share range. The value story there is straightforward. Amazon has a handful of businesses, and they are worth $300 to $1 trillion each. You add them together, and the businesses are worth, something in the order of magnitude $2.3 to $2.7 trillion. And you're buying this, and we bought the stock at $1.6 trillion. They're unquestionably, a massive growth company. They have dominated their industries. They've been exceedingly well run. And we bought it at what we think is a 25 to 30% discount to the sum of the parts.
So what about something like an NVIDIA? If you look at it from its high of June 18th down to a low on August 7th, it dropped almost 30%. So was that a buy for you?
$1 trillion discount.
$1 trillion discount, but no. The valuations on that just can't be justified by today's business or tomorrow's business or 2 years from now's business. You have to project 5 to 7 years of growth, and then the multiples stay at premium levels. So no, I mean, NVIDIA, it's down from the high, but it's still up massively. And from a valuation perspective, it's still way, way overdone. So that's where the devil's in the details, and the judgment comes in and separating, what is expensive versus what's not expensive, what is growth versus what isn't. And frankly, I think it's hard right now.
I wonder, I'm fascinated by this idea that everything over the last decade with zero interest rates was broken. Like the Phillips curve didn't work, the yield curve inverted, but didn't mean a recession. The Somme rule, didn't prove right? We're in a recession. Also, active could never beat passive. Value could never beat growth. Now that money isn't free anymore, which of those things changes?
Well, an awful lot changes. Businesses that generate cash will be valued on that cash flow rather than just looking at earnings growth and business and growth. We think the energy space is really, really compelling in many instances because the cash these businesses are throwing off relative to their share prices are just tremendous, and that's going to inure to shareholders one way or the other. So we think the world is different, and we've seen obviously a pause in the markets over the past 2 years. I mean, yeah, we've just had a massive run, but we're not significantly different than we were 2.5 years ago.
Right.
So we've had this pause in this gestation period.
Got it.
And we've adjusted to higher rates.
Okay, got to run. Hey, listen, thanks. Charles Lemonides, founder and chief investment officer at ValueWorks. Just want to mention Kava shares up more than 6% in the aftermarket. This after the restaurant chain raising its full-year outlook and posted second quarter results that beat expectations. The latest indicator that diners may be seeing some good value in some of those fast casual names. Again, Kava shares up more than 6%. This is Bloomberg.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Earnings after the bell include Cava Group. The restaurant chain raised its full-year outlook after posting second quarter results that beat expectations. Shares of the fast casual restaurant up by 5.5%. Intuit out with adjusted EPS for the first quarter. That guidance did miss the average analyst estimate, but after ours, we got Intuit higher now by roughly 3%. The HR solutions company Workday after ours down now by 4%. It reaffirmed its subscription revenue forecast for the full year. It also announced a strategic partnership with Equifax. Stocks move lower today ahead of Fed Chair Jay Powell's comments tomorrow. His speech will be closely watched by everyone for hints about interest rate policy. S&P today down 50, a drop of 0.9%. The Dow down 177, down 0.4. NASDAQ down 299, a drop of 1.7%. 10-year 3.86%, the 2-year 4.02%. Spot gold down 1.1%, 24.84 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.4%, 72.92 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Masser, along with Matt Miller, live in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Matt in for Tim on this Thursday. Well, the share of black students in the incoming class at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology plummeted after the Supreme Court effectively banned considering race as a factor in undergraduate admissions last year. Matt, you really, you got to look at this story. This is great for a setup with our next guest.
I sent you the story.
You did. That's what I said. I was giving you credit.
Oh, I thought you said I should look at the story. I was like, I sent you this. Yeah. No, I think it's absolutely fascinating.
Well, and the university said, they put this out yesterday, the class of 2028 is 5% black, down from an average of 13% in recent years. The share of Hispanic students in the class is 11%, and that's down from 15%. I am sure.
Well, the share of Asian students is now 47%, and it was 42%. So on the one hand,
right,
it's to their detriment, this new class, that they won't have as much representation from black people or from Hispanic people. On the other hand, you think, what happened to the Asians before that weren't getting in? They're getting the test scores, so,
I know. So, all right, let's see what our next guest has to say about this. I'm sure he's got some thoughts. Let's head to Atlanta and Ed Smith-Lewis. He's Senior Vice President of Strategy at UNCF, of course, the United Negro College Fund, and they support thousands of students and also HBCUs, close to 40 of them, historically black colleges and universities. Ed, great to have you here. We do believe you've got some thoughts on this. You hear those MIT statistics and you think what?
When I hear those MIT statistics, I think, where's the opportunity in all of it? How do we start to sort of maybe reposition sort of the deficit or the change in the percentage of individuals that may or may not enroll in our MITs of the world, and start to think more intentionally about how do we create more robust institutions that compare to MIT, and such as not a conversation about who got into the Ivy League, but how is our higher education system really serving the needs of all of our students, regardless of which sort of medallion institution they may have gone to. How do we think about investing the resources of MIT and the opportunities that MIT provide, and really start developing those in the other spaces and places where our students have been enrolled?
I mean, any higher education institution is going to want to have a diverse class that benefits everybody in the class, right? And you want it to be somewhat representative of the society in which you live. So if there's a deficit of black students or a deficit of Hispanic students, admissions is going to have to try and fix that. How can they fix it if they can't take, race or ethnicity into account?
Race may be one indicator of whether or not a student has or has not had the right set of opportunities or scored the right test, or scored the right score on the right test. But the reality is, if we look at other differentiating factors like lived experience, where people are born, what high schools they've gone to, and really look at the institutional context around an individual's experience, you can likely get to some of the same results, without ever really having to say race. And while that's a good thing,
How do you do it?
Well, you do it by looking at what schools individuals go to, right? How about we move away from the idea that we're going to take the highest SAT score from the #1 prep school as an admission requirement and say, well, if we want diversity, let's ensure that we're pulling students from all the types of institutions, public high schools, private high schools, rural high schools, and you'll likely get to the same place if you diversify your geographic approach or your institutional type.
So is this about looking at somebody who's maybe at a school system that isn't so great but did really well compared to their peers? Is that what you're talking about, or something else, or just being much more diverse in terms of where you look for students?
Well, I think it's where you look and what you're looking for. At present, we're putting a lot of energy into test scores, and we all know, or at least higher education knows, that test scores actually aren't an indicator of success. You can look at what other opportunities was the student engaged in based on his or her context. Now, is it great that you have a high test score and someone who played the piano in an orchestra? Perhaps, but maybe that student who came from a rural area where they didn't have access to the same types of opportunities, but led a student organization or participated in community service heavily, has the same type of tenacity and desire to grow and learn, maybe without the opportunities. And so what you're looking for is trying to right-size expectations on outcomes with expectations or inputs or opportunities those individuals have had.
So are you you're talking about the standardized testing? Is that in particular you're thinking is not a good thing?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I think standardized testing is just rooted in sort of a systematic approach to getting an understanding of one's aptitude. And I think we've learned through differentiated approaches in K-12 that not everyone learns the same. Yeah. And if you don't learn the same, you likely don't test the same. And so how do we start to think about differentiated models of assessing a student's readiness to learn? And that's what we're saying. We're just looking for differentiated approaches. Here at UNCF, we're a scholarship organization. Mm-hmm. We're actually looking at more cognitive opportunities, and we're moving away from sort of raw quantitative understanding to a qualitative one, where we're educating our readers or our scholarship application scorers on what can you look for and how a student thinks about his or her lived experience, what opportunities they had, how do they think about loss and failure, as well as their wins in their writing and how they communicate their experience, and less about the test score.
I know I went to some public school graduations in the Midwest this year, and I noticed that each of these schools with classes of 200 or 300 kids had 1 or 2 in the Ivy Leagues. Mm-hmm. And if you go to graduations here at, Nightingale Bamford School or collegiate, if you look at, graduating classes at Deerfield or Andover,
private schools,
they're putting dozens of kids into the Ivy Leagues. And I think that's part of their admissions process, and maybe the Ivies need to rethink that. Ed,
some of it, though, as I will also say, it's generational, families that
legacies
in a big way.
Right. Well, I mean, if these Ivy League schools really want diversity, they're going to have to really rethink that admissions process, because you can't always take a dozen kids from the most expensive boarding schools in the country and then ignore all these private schools in flyover country. Ed, talk to us about Acclaim, Accelerated Learning in Asset Investment Management. You're working to get a robust pipeline of students from historically Black colleges and universities, from HBCUs. So talk to us about this program and how you're doing it.
No, we're really excited about the support from Adage Capital and Phil Gross and its investment in Project Acclaim, where we are fundamentally focused on providing the right opportunities to our students to take advantage of the robust economy that we have in our country. Project Acclaim has 3 simple objectives. Thing number 1, provide student experiences from an academic perspective that really enables them to understand through hands-on experience to be an asset manager in this country. For many HBCUs, 75% of our students are low income or come from low income families. 60% are first in their in their family to go to college. They're first generation students. And so the idea that you would have exposure to asset management careers are few and far between for many of the students. More importantly than having that exposure to asset management is that real hands-on experience, because you can learn from the textbook all day, but until you had a real experience and an opportunity to sort of touch the opportunity, we know that our students don't do as well with sort of being thrown into the deep end. And so the question becomes, how can we move upstream in the asset management pipeline and start to invest heavily in real experience? That's what Project Acclaim is set to do. It will invest $4 million into an investment fund that's managed by students on the campuses of Morehouse and Howard University in our pilot years. This real investment opportunity to understand what does it take to ensure the risk profile of your investments are appropriate, to do the due diligence necessary to make an investment, to track, monitor, and assess the progress against your portfolio is a real opportunity that's going to be provided to these institutions. And with the support of Adage Capital, an opportunity to scale that to many more HBCUs over time. We're excited about this program, not just because of that hands-on experience, but the approach we're taking to do it. UNCF is leveraging a shared fund approach where Howard students and Morehouse students will operate under the same approach to understand what can we do to build the capacity of our institutions to provide these kind of high relevant programs. And so it also has the potential to scale.
Well, and I mean, the idea ultimately is to get them basically on Wall Street or in global Wall Street. I wonder if what I'm watching is, especially industrial companies in the Midwest, you know, John Deere, a Harley Davidson, a Jack Daniels, are shying away from their DEI initiatives. But I feel like Wall Street and American, you know, the American public still embraces these DEI initiatives. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Well, to your earlier point, to have diversity of perspective is actually to have an organization that's well functioning and efficient. As you might imagine, when it comes to investment, it's always knowing where is the puck going. And to have different perspectives sitting around the table means your due diligence is just better. And we've seen from minority asset managers, sometimes 1, 2, 3x outcomes compared to market rates. And that's just because sometimes you're asking a different question, which often leads to a different answer. And so that diversity of perspectives, we think, is a benefit to all companies, not just our asset management.
Tons of research, right, over decades have pointed that out, the importance of diversity in the boardroom, diversity at a company. But having said that, you know, as companies, I do wonder, Ed, as companies increasingly are rolling back their DEI plans and strategies, as Matt just pointed out, you know, Harley Davidson, you had Jack Daniels maker Brown-Forman today, we had a story on it, Deere and Company. How does it make it more difficult for maybe what you're trying to do to get that pipeline that is more diverse, whether it's going into financial services or somewhere else? At about 45 seconds.
No, it's always been a difficult struggle, to say the least. We are trying to close systemic gaps in opportunity within organizations, but the reality is, for those that are taking a step back at this moment, we're focusing our attention on those who are leaning in. We fundamentally believe if we can find the coalition of the willing, prove the value, that it becomes a market differentiator, then those who may have stepped back for the moment might realize the business opportunity associated with this and come on board and eventually realize not only is it beneficial to the business, it's beneficial to inclusion generally in our country.
All right. Well, listen, super good to get some time with you. I really appreciate it. Good luck with your pursuits there. Ed Smith-Lewis, he's Senior VP of Strategy at the United Negro College Fund, joining us here on Bloomberg Business Week. When we come back, something that Matt knows nothing about. Vintage cars. He knows a lot about it. Stick around. That's coming up on Bloomberg Business Week.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got Intuit shares now up by almost 3% in extended trading after the tax preparation software company reported fourth quarter results that beat expectations. Intuit, after hours, now trading higher. We got Intuit up by just about 2.9%. Workday shares trading lower after hours. The HR Solutions company did reaffirm its subscription revenue forecast for the year. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declined today. S&P 500 index down 50, ending the Thursday session at 5570, a drop today of 0.9%. The Dow was down 177, lower by 0.4%. NASDAQ tumbled 1.7%. 10-year yield 3.85%. The 2-year 4.01%. Spot gold down 1.1%. 24.83 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.5%. 72.99 a barrel. Well, as for the overall economic backdrop heading into tomorrow's Jay Powell speech, Eric Hirsch is co-CEO at Hamilton Lane, and he was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
I think we're going to clearly start to see rates coming down, but I think sort of from our perspective, sort of the concerns of recession or hard landing are sort of just grossly overstated right now. We're just not seeing the consumer spending in the areas that really matter and drive the economy. We're just not seeing those let up.
Eric Hirsch of Hamilton Lane. Again, recapping, stocks did move lower today. The S&P 500 index fell 50 points, a drop of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Hey, everybody, remember, if you are listening to us in Boston, the great city of Boston, our new home starting September 3rd will be 92.9 FM. That's the day right after Labor Day. So mark your calendars. Bloomberg Radio moving to 92.9 FM in
So we
Boston.
have an FM and an AM station in Boston, but they're going to
now-
both move to
Correct.
92.9 FM.
Yep. So
in September.
So do not miss us there. I love the city of Boston.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
Such a beautiful city. All right.
I met Amanda Gorman there.
You did. That was my second time of meeting her there.
I also met the Indigo Girls there.
You did.
Melissa
Etheridge. Jinx. All right. Let's get to a place where, yep, there were a lot of great old vintage cars. There were buyers, and yes, there were cars sold, but not at the pace, Matt, that we've seen as of late.
Yeah, but still, I think one of the most important now car shows in the world, supplanting, the Detroit Auto Show or Geneva, maybe up there with the CES in Las Vegas as a place where all the manufacturers want to be and all the collectors want to be. It's kind of unique in that sense.
It's a beautiful backdrop as well. We're talking about in Monterey, California. Let's get to it with Bloomberg Pursuit's auto columnist Hannah Elliott joining us from the Bloomberg LA Bureau. Hannah, also the co-host of the Bloomberg Hot Pursuit podcast that she does with Matt, and it's why it's so good because she's on it. Oh, did I say that out loud?
That's why we chose her.
Oh my! Actually, love to both of you. It's like I feel like, oh my God, this is such a great thing. Tell us about this. I know I'm lucky because I actually talked about this with you earlier, but walk us through what these auctions are all about and what was going on.
So it's kind of a great question. Monterey Car Week and Pebble Beach both get sort of thrown out together. And basically, it's a week that is like the Olympics of cars, if you can imagine this, in Carmel, California, which is also Monterey. It's new car launches, like Matt said, but it's also a lot of classic car auctions. This is where the 5 primary classic car auction houses like Gooding, RM Sotheby's, Bonhams, all come together and sell their best cars. And this year in particular was really interesting because sales were really down. They were about $370 million this year, which was $100 million lower than last year for roughly the same amount of vehicles on the auction block. So we're seeing a real pause this year. The word I got was, it's a correction. We're not panicking yet. But it is a correction. There are a lot of cars, a lot of good cars on the market, and smart buyers aren't desperate to buy. They're very patient, which sounds healthy to me, actually.
I think so, too. I mean, I feel like prices were just getting too damn high. You were telling me a ton of intel, Hannah, last week, and I guess the average price for a car at auction in Monterey last year was $916,000. That's the average, right? So now, what you were saying to me a little bit earlier today, we were talking about the cars over $1 million. Only like half of them sold, right?
Yeah, the sell-through rate on $1 million plus cars, kind of the blue chip, if you will, cars,
was 52%, so about half, which is really bad. I mean, the sell-through rate across all the auctions on all cars this year was 71%, which is a little low, but it's fine. It's actually a little higher than last year. But for $1 million plus cars to be selling 50-50 or not selling, that's not a good sign. It is interesting that we're seeing a little bit of a changing of the guard. Some of these older classic cars from the 60s and earlier are struggling. Like, if they're not perfect, mint condition, basically one of one, people aren't going to buy them, and I think that's being reflected in the sell-through rates. On the other hand, we are seeing a real upshift in appreciation for cars from the 90s and 2000 era, which I guess are considered vintage cars.
Radwood.
Yeah, I hate saying that because I'm kind of from that era too, but
Ouch,
they are
this
considered
hurts.
vintage. I know. But they're coming on strong. We saw a world record for an F50 this year. It sold for $5.5 million at RM Sotheby's, and it wasn't actually a perfect car. It'd been repainted a couple times, but I think that shows there's a real appreciation.
$5.5 million for an F50 that doesn't have any kind of like race pedigree and wasn't like original like parts matching. That's incredible.
Who's buying it? Is it a younger buyer? Like, what's going on?
Yes.
And I also wonder about the macro environment, rates or whatever, and how that's impacting things.
So that's a great two questions. To answer your first question, it's younger buyers. And in this case, younger means like 40 and under. It's people who have made their money in tech or inherited their money or who have been entrepreneurs and made a lot of money very quickly. That's considered a younger buyer who wants things they can drive to events, to social engagements, things that they can drive with their friends, and that might be a little bit more drivable than some of the older things. And then to your second question, the number one thing I kept hearing from people was that it's interest rates that are really giving people pause. Yes, the presidential election it is in the back of people's minds, and yes, the geopolitical climate in Europe is also affecting things, but really it's interest rates, and it's kind of about where you want to put your money now and how confident you feel about the next year or so.
So Hannah, if you don't know, she drove a Lamborghini Revuelto up to Monterey. I think you drove a Ferrari Purosang back.
On the way back, yes.
I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but a couple of new, 12-cylinder beasts. But I was most impressed with the Maybach that you drove. Tell us about this thing.
I think I was most impressed by that too. It was a 1932 Maybach Zeppelin that the Mercedes-Benz Classic Center owns. This is like a very, very rare old car that they have at their Classic Center. They brought it up to the Salinas Airport in Monterey to let people learn to drive it. And the cool thing about this car, it's like a massive 6,000-pound topless stately coach, but it actually has a semi-automatic transmission, which means that you use a clutch to go into first and reverse. But other than that, you just move these little levers on the steering wheel to change gears. So it was really fun. A German man named Manfred taught me how to drive it, and there might have been some things lost in translation, let's say, but he was very enthusiastic and patient, and it was really fun.
And it goes to 0 to 60, like how quickly?
I don't know that, but I do know the top speed of that car is like 120 miles per hour, which is really incredible for a machine from that era, that big. I don't know about the brakes. I don't know if I'd trust the brakes at that speed, but
I don't.
But for its time, it was great.
Cece, take my camera. It's actually Matt's phone. I don't know if you can see this. Wait, can you see it?
I love your outfit in the. It kind of like fits.
Thank you. Great, I'm pulling it back.
It's almost like a steampunk kind of thing that goes with the car to some extent.
That is gorgeous.
And it's
really special.
Yeah.
There she is.
Very cool stuff. And of course, the winner of the Pebble Beach, the beauty show, the Concorde Elegance, was also a pre-war
When I come back in my next live, can I be Hannah Elliott?
Yeah, I hear a lot of people asking that question.
I know. We all want to be you, Hannah. Always fun.
Come on in. The water's fine.
I feel blessed to get her 2 times in a day. You're the best. Hannah Elliott, she covers all things auto industry.
And co-hosts Hot Pursuit.
Wait.
Bloomberg's car podcast.
What is that?
Get it on Bloomberg.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Canada's two major freight railroads are being forced to enter contract arbitration with its labor union. Canada's Labour Minister Stephen McKinnon confirming the decision at a news conference moments after the AP broke the news publicly. Uber plans to start offering self-driving cruise cars to customers on its ride-hailing platform next year. Carol and Matt will have more on that story coming up in just a moment. Big day for Peloton shares. The stock rallied after Peloton reported revenue and profit that beat analyst estimates in the fourth quarter, signaling the struggling fitness company's turnaround efforts are starting to bear fruit. Peloton today surged 35%. Geetha Raghunathan is an analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence.
So they're principally known as a cardio company. Bike has really been their main product. They've introduced a treadmill that, of course, hasn't really taken off. And, it does have a pretty stiff price point, almost $6,000. And we're seeing this broad-based, consumer slowdown. So, consumers are obviously postponing their spending on big-ticket items. So that's not going to help Peloton either. So in terms of the to-do list, there's obviously a lot of different things. But we think, M&A, they have to kind of try and find a buyer ultimately, as an exit strategy for the company.
Bloomberg's Geetha Raghunathan again. Peloton up 35.4%. Jack Daniel's whiskey maker Brown-Forman has become the latest company to scrap corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs as pressure increasingly grows from conservatives. Today we saw Brown-Forman shares lower by about 0.1%. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, more Business Week to come in just a moment. First up, though, another update on World and National News. So that means it's off to D.C. and Amy Morris. Amy.
All right, thank you, Carol. This, of course, is the final night of the Democratic National Convention. Kamala Harris's acceptance speech as the party's presidential nominees. Next up, Evan Roth-Smith is lead pollster with the Democratic polling firm Blueprint and says the vice president has begun to define her economic agenda.
We saw prices highlighted in a big way and economic concerns, this bread and butter concern for families, working families, highlights from her career as California Attorney General, played again and again in videos and during speeches at the convention that she took on big companies. And we're going to see that more and more as she defines herself as this champion of working people.
Democratic pollster Evan Roth-Smith speaking with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern from the convention in Chicago. The U.S. Supreme Court will allow Arizona to partially enforce a state law requiring residents to provide proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote ahead of the November election. The Republican National Committee asked the justices to intervene in the battleground state for Donald Trump's campaign after a federal district judge blocked the law. The case is a test of an 18-year-old Supreme Court precedent cautioning federal judges against changing voting rules too close to an election. Venezuela's Supreme Court has backed President Nicolas Maduro's claims that he won last month's election and said the voting tallies that were published online showing that he lost by a landslide had been forged. The High Court is packed with Maduro loyalists and has almost never ruled against his government. U.S. regulators have signed off on an updated COVID-19 vaccine designed to more closely target more recent virus strains and hopefully whatever variants cause any trouble this winter. The latest clearance allows Pfizer and Moderna to begin shipping millions of doses. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. Now back to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Matt Miller.
Thank you so much, Amy Morris there in D.C. So we're getting ready to wrap up here on this Thursday. You and I are both off tomorrow. You're heading off on a vacation.
I'm going to Spain.
You are going to Spain. Good stuff. I'll be back on Tuesday. Tim's going to be back tomorrow. But in the meantime, Charlie Pellet sharing a story. He mentioned this about what, ouch, it's never good when you hit the bike. Uber planning to start offering self-driving cruise cars to customers on its ride-hailing platform next year. Is that a good thing? I don't know.
You know what? I don't think it's that big of a deal. You can already, it's a cool story. So thanks to Charlie for telling us. But you can
Stock
already
is down about 3% in the aftermarket.
You can already get self-driving taxi service, if you will, in San Francisco and in some other test cities. So this is just that.
So you just get in a car and it's self-driving, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So Cruise is a unit of General Motors, and it had been operating in San Francisco until last year in October, when there was an incident and I think a car hit a pedestrian, and there were some other things about,
they were hospitalized, I think, for months there.
Exactly. It's not, obviously, it's a horrible story.
Right.
But that has happened pretty often with cars that have actual human drivers in them as well. In fact, far more often, right? So
there is a point to that.
You know, I think the industry wants to get to a point where there's more self-driving cars out there than people-driven